friends, and it's a great group. We're going to start with Mark, and I'm going to ask Mark to kind of give us the lay of the land.
Sure.
Like where you see things.
We're glad to do so, and very honored to be among such an honorable panel. I'm just going to give you some statistics, really, and so a little bit of analysis. As recently as 25 years ago, the federal government had a budget surplus of over 1% of GDP, and debt outstanding was only 32% of GDP. Now, 25 years later, even with a good economy and low unemployment, we have a deficit of 6% of GDP and debt outstanding at 101%. This rapid deterioration came mainly on the spending side, as outlays increased from 17.5% of GDP to 23%, while revenues declined from 19% to 17.5%. So, and the patterns have also changed over the years, unfortunately. Unlike the past, we no longer see much improvement in fiscal conditions when the economy gets stronger, which occurred in the past, and the projections are for a further deterioration. So the Congressional Budget Office sees, according to current law, sees the deficit going to 7% in 10 years and to 9% in 30 years, and debt outstanding to going up from to 120% in 10 years and to 175% of GDP in 30 years. Particularly noteworthy in these statistics is the federal spending on interest. There's an increase going from currently, which has increased quite a bit over the last few years, but is now 3% of GDP. It's going to go up to 4.5% in 10 years and to 7% in 30 years, according to the CBO. Now, this is, I'm even a little nervous to give bad news, but unfortunately, it's worse than that, because this sober view is too optimistic for several reasons. Most immediately, and this is just data that just came out, a couple months ago, but it did not see the recent increase in interest rates, which has been very significant, or the illegality of the tariffs. So this certainly worsens the CBO would say it's worse now than it was 3 months ago. But more significantly and unrealistically, I have some criticism of the CBO because it projects out into the future an actual decline in defense and other discretionary spending as a share of GDP. It assumes stable interest rates, constrained government spending on healthcare, despite the severe inefficiency of the healthcare sector, and no increase in Medicaid spending on long-term care, especially home care, and this is despite, of course, the aging of the population that we all know is occurring. So I've done some modeling in this area, and correcting in all these areas. My model projects, according to current policy, that the deficit will be 7.5% in 10 years and 14% in 30 years, and the debt outstanding will be 138% in 10 years and 271% in 30 years. And as Robert indicated, that is clearly not sustainable.
270 instead of 170.
271 in 30 years.
Yeah. Those are some pretty depressing figures.
Yep.
And I think interest rates in particular is one we'll talk about later, but I think CBO, unfortunately, is just based on what's happened in the last month, is underestimating the impact of interest rates. Well, we've got such a great panel here, and we've now level set. We're all properly depressed. But Steve Daines has a vote coming up, so I'm going to ask him if he doesn't mind in going next, because we don't want to miss you. And you've been great. You've been a leader in the Senate on these issues, Steve, on everything from fiscal commission to coming up with a percent of GDP number that makes sense. Why don't you talk to us a little about what to do with this emerging debt crisis and what's practical. And I might ask you to talk a little bit, too, about what Republicans could do in terms of the revenue side if Democrats are willing to do something on the spending side.
Yeah.
Fire away.
Well, first of all, Rob and my colleague Joe Mensch, we missed you both in the U.S. Senate. Two great colleagues, pragmatic problem solvers, truly, finding ways through and getting outcomes, making a difference versus making a point. Those stats were just shared are probably the number one thing that would keep me awake at night. When you get asked the question, what keeps you awake at night, it would be what was just shared. We are running a very dangerous experiment here in the United States. We're living on borrowed time because we got a heap of borrowed money. And I just came back from Norway, had a couple of days. My great-great-grandmother who came to the United States and homesteaded in Montana was a Norwegian immigrant. If there's any Norwegian immigrants, a shout out to you all. but met with Jens Stoltenberg, who was the Prime Minister of Norway twice, former General Secretary of NATO as well for 10 years. You know what Norway did once upon a time when they discovered oil and gas? It's kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies. They suddenly saw oil and gas. Jens made the decision back in 1999 to invest in the sovereign wealth fund, basically in the S&P index, instead of fixed 3 and 4% kind of more secure investments. Consequently, now Norway sits on the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. It's not the Saudis, it's not the Emirates, it's the Norwegians. So stop making Norwegian jokes. The Norwegians have the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. They have a very good, solid fiscal situation. I'm not advocating we adopt Norway's very, far left, more progressive kind of tax policies, but there's a lesson certainly about investing wisely and what that does over time versus lesson perhaps is for Social Security longer term. But let me cut to the chase. Rob, when I first came to Washington, I introduced the Balanced Budget Accountability Bill, which is basically going to penalize members of Congress if we did not balance the budget. I fully support any of the above and all the above solutions that are out there in terms of amendments to the Constitution. 49 states have similar laws that are binding here in terms of ensuring you have fiscal responsibility. I support all of that. Here's my concern. Having now been in the city for almost 14 years, 2 years in the House and 12 years in the US Senate, I'm concerned that this institution lacks the will to ever do anything. And just to be transparent, we could sit here and talk about good policy all day. I'm not sure we're going to have the politics to actually deliver the policies needed, short of either a forcing function of, as you know, a financial crisis can start very, very slowly until it starts moving very, very fast. We don't know at what point. It's $39 trillion when you now have debt greater than your GDP. At what point do you hit a cliff? I used to be in the cloud computing business. When you look at capacity of servers in a cloud environment, it's logarithmic in nature in terms of capacity. It doesn't just linearly start to decline, it just suddenly falls off a cliff. I think that's the worries of many of us here. So I think, Rob, we're gonna have to open the aperture up and think about what can innovation drive to help solve two of our biggest challenges on the entitlement side, which is Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid expenses are now almost equal to Medicare at nearly $1 trillion a year. And it's the mandatory spending side we all know is the problem. But if anybody touches reforms, it's the third rail of American politics. So I'm not optimistic. Maybe shorter divided government someday, but as soon as somebody starts to talk about reforms, you now are in political danger. I just came back from China 3 weeks ago. I was there the week before President Trump and Marco and Scott were there in the meetings with the premier and with Wang Yi and with and Xi Jinping. I met with Wang Yi, I met with the premier. We also had a chance to look at the innovation going on right now in China. There's some lessons to be learned. Two quick things. In terms of using AI and robotics, there are breakthroughs happening now that will extend into the future as we think about how do we use AI and robotics to significantly lower overall healthcare costs. This almost starts to sound like a sci-fi movie. They are now placing stents, heart stents, using robotics and AI in patients. That may say that's frightening. Well, this is where things are headed, using AI agents right now in terms of first-level primary care docs. Think about what's going on in pharma and biotech development. There's a company called Extalpi over there that 24/7, they're using AI and robotics to develop the next generation molecules for breakthrough, next cancer drug, the next Alzheimer drug. 70% of this company's revenues now come from US pharma because they can deliver phase 1 clinical trials twice as fast at 20% of the cost that we're doing right now in the United States. And you might say, well, that's because the Chinese don't have the right standards and so forth. That's partly true, but generally they're starting to move to, I would call it more FDA type approved type standards. So Rob, I'm starting to think more broadly about how do we drive innovation to help us lower two of our biggest entitlement costs, Medicaid and Medicare, by bending the cost curve for healthcare, because I don't think this city has the political will to solve the problem.
Well, thanks for that sobering assessment of where the House and Senate is and Washington in general, but also some hope in terms of not just dealing with these important entitlement programs, but productivity generally. which AI also will help the economy overall with economic growth, and the GDP number will be reflective of that. Let's go to the House. Jody, I've been so impressed watching you deliver the impossible, which is bipartisan legislation out of the House Budget Committee, including legislation to provide for a fiscal commission. I've also watched as those issues have gotten mired down in partisan politics and unable to move. Can you talk a little about that experience you've had, where you've been successful, where you've found problems, and what you think the way forward is?
I think the way forward is to set an example to other aspiring political leaders to, if not make an oath, make a pledge in their hearts that their pledges are not to one group or another, but to do what's right and good for the Republic and for our children's future. I mean, we have people who take these pledges that they won't reform particular entitlements, which will be perceived as cuts. You have Republicans who take pledges who say, I'll never raise taxes. But we never talk about the cuts that will ensue automatically when some of these programs are insolvent, A. And B, we never talk about the taxes that we are heaping on the shoulders of our children and grandchildren. So I'd love to have a deferred tax pledge to stop the deferred tax, which is the rising deficits. At $2 trillion, we're borrowing $6 billion a day. By the time I finish with this answer, it will be probably 20 million that we borrow, if you're lucky. By the time the panel's through with our work, if we do it in an hour, we will have borrowed $300 million. And that gets exponentially worse, as you know, over the next decade, 2 or 3. We borrow $2 trillion this year, which is more than 6 states' annual budgets, and we'd be the 16th largest economy in the world. So let's start by taking a pledge that we're actually going to do something about it, and that we're going to put everything on the table, so that we can't simply say that we're going to cut our way out of it, and we need to grow, because 1 percentage point over the annual average projection of growth in the 10-year budget window is $3 trillion in deficit reduction. So growth is part of the equation, but we're not going to grow out of it either. And we're not going to tax our way out of it. So intellectual honesty, political courage, like I've seen from the folks up here, including yourself. That's why I like the Debt Commission, because while I'm proud that we did bend the curve on mandatory spending in the big, beautiful bill by $1.6 trillion, which is twice as much than we've ever reduced it. And mandatory is the big driver, as we all know. And we've held flat since the Fiscal Responsibility Act. People are saying, don't negotiate around a debt ceiling. I think 8 of the 10 biggest reforms came out of a debt ceiling negotiation, including the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And by the way, just keeping flat, just controlling spending on the discretionary side, about 25% of the budget, will save $1.5+ trillion over the 10-year budget window. We've saved about almost $500 billion to date over the last 3 years. That's real money in Plainview, Texas. But at the end of the day, we would have to repeat that over and over, and I have been at the table for these discussions on budget reconciliation 1, 2, 3, and we could go to 10. And real quickly, the political will runs out on my side of the aisle too. So let's get thoughtful leaders like the folks up here, put them in a room, get credible folks from the outside. They don't have to vote, but they will help us sound the alarm and capture the imagination and attention of the American people that Houston, we have a problem, it's unsustainable, and it will be irreparable to this great country and our children's future. So do that, learn from the Joe Manchin, Romney, Simpson, Bowles, Alan Greenspan. We got the solution. Let's get the will, let's pass it again. Let's get the President, Trump, to be committed no matter how things shake out in November. I could argue it could be better in a split Congress. I don't want to give up the majority, but what I want to do is save our country from fiscal calamity the likes of which we haven't experienced even in the Great Depression. That's what I want. And so we're going to make another run at that fiscal commission. I imagine we'll do it before the end of the year. And then let's figure out a way so that that the ways you can kill things on Capitol Hill and the political games that are played can be mitigated, and we can have expedited consideration on an up or down vote on a bunch of things that probably both sides don't like, but no, we desperately need in terms of the medicine that this nation will need to take in order to stave off this rapid decline.
Thanks, Jody. That was very helpful. And
That was more than 20 million in borrowing, but
I
I
think
tried
you
to
were-
stick it.
27 and a half, isn't
Yeah,
that
man,
bad?
and growing.
But thanks for talking about some of the incremental progress that we have made, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
And sometimes from the outside, you look in and say, gosh, why can't they do this? Well, welcome to the big leagues here. It's hard. And we have made some incremental progress. And your point on productivity, too, and economic growth, Steve, we'll come back to both of you. But in the meantime, we're going to go back to the Senate, to the one person on the panel. Well, Mark, I don't know what your political affiliation is, but Manchin is sometimes a Democrat, sometimes an independent, sometimes a Republican. I just don't know quite where he is today.
I don't either.
But no, he's an American is what he is. And Joe has been a leader in the Senate on these issues and has taken some slings and arrows from his own former Democrat colleagues. And he and Mitt Romney, as you may know, introduced in the Senate the version of the bill that Jody was able to get out of his House committee, which was, again, a very impressive feat. And so, Joe's been through it. He's had to take some critiques from the right and the left. So tell us about it, and tell us about what you think the way forward is.
Well, the fiscal commission we talked about, Bette and I used to get together and talk about different things, how we can bring some civility to it, but also bring some reliability to it, and also just the reality of what we're dealing with. No one really seemed to care a little bit because it was too much of a pain for anyone to take on, and no one was going to basically say, oh yeah, I'll cut that. Oh yeah, no, we'll increase taxes here. No one was wanting to do any of that. Right. So then we finally come up with a stress test. Just ask the Department of Treasury to do a stress test every year and tell us how we're able to handle some of the critical things that might happen to our country. Banks do it. Large corporations do stress testing. We all know where we stand. Individuals, we all do it. If you hit a major bump in the road with your income you have and your savings, what type of stress does it put on it? Can you handle it? We're not facing any of that in real time. We really aren't. And I look back, so the last time we had a balanced budget was under John Kasich and Erskine Bowles in 1997 under Bill Clinton as president. They put a budget out. We had, not only did we have balanced budgets, we had surpluses. And by 2001 was the last year we had that. We'd have been debt-free by 2006 if we'd have continued with that rate that we had at that time. So I said, if the rate was that, it worked that well back then, did not cause a harm. It was the dot-com era, that we hit all that. Why can't we look at some of those rates again? And all we keep talking about is cutting, 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 and then we keep adding to spending, spending, spending. So if you want to blame it, I talk to audience, I says, if you're a Democrat, fine, you should be mad at the Republicans. If you're a Republican, fine, you should be mad at the Democrats. Under George W. Bush, we put over almost $5 trillion in his 8 years. Obama comes on and we put almost $9 trillion, okay? So when you look at it, Obama was $9 trillion. And then you had, under Trump, the one was about $7.8 trillion. And then you have under Biden, 8.5. So it's continued to climb. It's almost like a contest, who could add up more debt? And it kept growing and growing. And not one time did we ever have anyone say, whoa, wait a minute, maybe we better think about this. As a former governor, every Tuesday I used to sit down like clockwork. My staff would come in, financial staff, Tuesday, and around 2 or 3 o'clock, and we sat there, and they would give me the good and the bad and the ugly. And they would say, right now we're on track. We put a budget out, and this is what we're on track. We're going to make it. We're going to be fine. If there was a warning, I'd get a warning the first time. On 1 week, I'd get a warning. During 2008, 2009, during the crash, we were meeting daily because the warnings were coming at us so fast of what was happening. We were making adjustments on the fly, trying to stay within the boundaries of what we had. And those types of things it was expected. It was demanded by our state constitution. So I get to the Senate, and I couldn't figure out, I said, how come no one's worried about this? we have very little conference in our caucuses. And Republicans, I don't know how much you all talked about it in yours. There was not that much conversation in a Democrat caucus about worried about the debt. Max used to bring it up and try to raise hell about it and say, hey guys, someone better pay attention. But again, deaf ears. So we come now and then, you have a situation to where we're going to look at all the dynasties. I went back in history and I said, I want to know, how is it debt taking a toll on the world order over centuries and centuries? In the 17th century, the Habsburg Spain fell because of debt. In the 18th century, the ancient regime of France fell. And the Ottoman Empire fell in 1918. The Austrian-Hungary fell in 1918. The Tsarist Russia fell in 1917. The British Empire collapsed in the 18th century. United Kingdom fell. And then you had the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century. And you had the Ming Dynasty that fell. And every one of them fell because of debt. And we're on track to do it. And then you had the Ferguson rule, basically the Ferguson law, that whenever the debt exceeds what your military expenditures might be for your defense, you're on a downward spiral and you don't recover from that one. We just did it this year. Our interest was greater than what we spend on our national defense. So all the warning signs have more than flashed at us, and we're still not doing anything. So for AEI to do what you're doing, to continue to keep it up front, for you all to be here today, to be here with Jody and to be here with Steve and Maya and Professor Yu telling us what the weather's going to be, and Rob, which we had no problem. We had bipartisan groups. We used to sit down and talk all the time. You don't see that much anymore, and you really have to work at it. But I can tell you one thing: if you don't pay attention to history, you'll surely repeat it. And the debt that we're carrying right now it's a travesty to the children. We're the first generation that's going to turn it over to another generation worse than what we received it. The first generation in this great country of ours that we're going to give our generation, next generation coming, my children, your children and grandchildren, a worse scenario than we received. And that's a shame. That's not what any parent wants to do. Not what any grandparent wants to do. So with that, I'm happy to do anything I can to speak up on it, because I know that my grandfather told me a little thing. He says, let me tell you, Joe, unmanaged debt will lead you to make cowardly decisions. Just think about that. Unmanaged debt will lead you to make cowardly decisions. He said, where do you think robbing Peter to pay Paul came from? We just shifted things around. Yeah. We've all done it we've all gotten crimped to a certain extent. The average person has to work it out. Government does not have to. We never had a printing press in West Virginia, so we weren't able to keep pace with what they were doing here. But I can tell you one thing. I told someone in 2011, I'll never forget this, I says, I want to buy stock in the ink and the paper that prints the money. That's all I want to do. I thought that would be the greatest stock investment I could ever make. And it would have been very successful. I'm just tickled to death to work here with you, and I'm with Maya on so many things, and she's out there fighting that good fight every day, and God bless you, honey, but we've got to do something. It's not going to happen from within. What Steve said, the pain is too great, and the self-preservation as far as politics to succeed because of how well we do or how it's going to be presented to our voting public is going to overshadow. So I'm to the point now, I said term limits, and I'll tell you why I'm a term limit. I said term limits, I was always opposed to them, and I was a governor in about 2009, 2008, and I was a little gathering, maybe 300 people down in southern West Virginia. A little lady got in the back, her name was Susie. She said, hey, Joe. She said, Mr. Joe, she says, why don't you just be for term limits? And I gave her all the reasons why we would lose some of this experience and knowledge and everything. She said, think about this, Mr. Joe. She says, if we had term limits, maybe we get one good term out of you. I said, hell, she convinced me. I sold from that day on. I've been for it. And I've said this. Think about this. If a president had one 6-year term, commander-in-chief from day one to the end of the day never had to worry about re-election, never had any aides coming to him. Anybody said, well, we got to get ready for the next election. We're 2 years into this one. 2 more years now. We got to get ready. So they slow you down. As governor, they start winding me down, try to wind me down after the first year and a half. And they said, well, we got to get ready. And I said, well, wait a minute, I'm still working on this. So I said that. 2 6-year terms for us, Senate. 6 2-year terms for the House, Jody.
Yes, sir.
okay?
that's-
And then one 18-year term for the Supreme Court. You would have some things moving. You'd have people coming that may meet the generational changes that are needed. We've got to start talking in these realms and look at it realistically. How do we save our country?
Thank you,
Rob,
Joe.
I got it. I'm getting a hook because I got to go back and vote. Here's the
Yes.
irony of why I'm getting pulled right now.
They'll wait for him, trust me. I know
Reconciliation.
they'll wait for him.
Well, they need my vote today because it's a close one. But here's the irony of why I'm going to vote right now. I'm going to have to leave the panel. Is for 30 consecutive years, Congress has failed to pass the appropriation bills prior to the start of the next fiscal year. Of course, the fiscal year is October 1st. 30 consecutive years. If you go back 50 years, go back to the Budget Control Act, it's happened 4 times. Right. The irony right now is I'm going back to Capitol Hill to cast a vote so we can fund the Department of Homeland Security at a time when the threat level in this country has never been greater with the current conflict in Iran. I'm going back right now to see if we can get DHS funded for the next couple of years because we anticipate we won't be able to get that done the last 2 years of President Trump's administration because of what's happened with ICE.
And we're having to use a hammer instead of the screwdriver,
Yeah.
i.e. reconciliation instead of appropriations. But by God, we're going to do it because we're not going to allow us to go dark right now or ever on Homeland Security. So God bless you for doing it. Get that second reconciliation back over to us so we can do that first job. And by the way, consider Lankford's legislation, and I'm carried it in the House, to not shut the government down, but to shut us in here until we do our job.
100% behind Lankford's bill, by the way. I'm a co-sponsor of it.
Good.
But we're dealing there with the appropriations with only 25% of the spending because that's the discretionary side. The real problem is the 75% on the mandatory side. It's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, which are the third rail. So this is why I think we have to open the aperture up if we want to get a policy outcome versus nice panels. So that's my thought for the day. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good stuff. Great job.
Thanks.
Chief Powell. All right. Joe, you gave us a lot to work with here, including talking about the state issues. And I see the Article 5 Convention of the States folks were here as well. I see that might come up in another
Where's
panel.
Leon?
But let's talk a little about solutions, Maya. You've heard now from everybody. By the way, I hate to have been the staffer who came to Joe Manchin and said, tune it down. You know, when they told you to slow down after a year and a half. That staff didn't last
It
very long.
never happened, though. It didn't happen. No, we just went balls to the wall.
Yeah, of
all the
course,
way.
of course. Maya,
Okay,
you agreed to play, to bat cleanup here.
I'm going to bat clean
What are
up.
your thoughts?
I'm going to also reinforce some of the bad news before I explain how we're going to fix it,
Okay.
because it's really bad. What's terrible is that every number you look at the budget and the fiscal situation right now is in bad shape. And just a couple that I think are really important are the fact that interest payments now, not only are they more than defense, which is a moment that no country has ever gone to continue its role in the world as a superpower once its interest was larger than defense, but it's the fastest growing part of the federal budget. And the other I want to reinforce is the fact that Social Security and Medicare's trust funds are headed towards insolvency, something their trustees tell us every single year. We know that if we hit that moment, you have across-the-board benefit cuts or provider cuts, and yet we have done nothing to fix these programs. Less than 7 years before Social Security becomes insolvent, and there are across-the-board benefit cuts of 24%, which is the single stupidest way we would resolve the insolvency situation. So that's one bad thing. The second bad thing is, and I too have been doing this for a long time and watched the fiscal situation deteriorate steadily throughout it. But when I started working on this issue, it was clearly because fiscal policy, when you're over-indebted, creates real economic threats. It slows economic growth, it crowds out in public investment, your budget gets eaten up by interest payments. But I would say that in the past years, it's also turned now, and it's not just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. And this is a moment of such grave danger around the world. And we know that the way that things are fought, it's not just tanks and boots on the ground, right? It's economic and it's digital. And we are immensely vulnerable with the fact that we're dependent on non-allies to lend us money and the fact that we are overly constrained. And that is going to be dictating some of our national security budget priorities at a time when it's security we should be thinking about first and foremost. The third piece of depressing news, as I see it, is just how much worse the environment has become. And I'm actually sitting between two of the people who I think have done the most to really break the political molds and push this issue, push against your parties, push against the hard messages that people don't want to hear. But it's tough up there. It is really tough. And the fiscal situation has gotten worse, so that anyone who's telling the truth, fixing it's not going to be easy anymore. We could have done this decades ago without really feeling much of a difference at all. That's not true now. It's going to be hard. And so when you start talking about these specific policies, they're larger than they would have been before, and the pain is greater. At the same time, we've become really kind of accustomed to our political leaders giving us things. Here's your big tax cut. Here's your new spending program. Like, we don't expect to be part of the solution. And the polarization, the levels of the partisanship and polarization make it so difficult for people who are willing to speak truth about this issue, because you know that it's really easy to come out and say, keep your hands off Social Security, or you can never raise a penny of revenue, when those things aren't true. But the political ads write themselves. And so we're in a tougher fiscal time and a tougher political time. Where I think the good news is, a lot of people talked about this, was that even though we know the policy fixes, and I could tick them off, we all could, I think we have to look to things that are going to push members of Congress to make those choices. And not only do we have a lot of ideas, there's actually really momentum behind a lot of them. So I'll just start with a couple. We used to always talk about balancing the budget, and I still would like to see a balanced budget as soon as possible without derailing the economy. But we need to get there step by step. And there has been broad-based, bipartisan, bicameral, outside experts, all sorts of people who are pushing for bringing our deficits from 6% to 3% of GDP as a first step to getting towards where we need to go. It's big enough that it would reassure markets, and it's small enough that it's realistic. Because when we put out an idea, oh, let's balance the budget, which would cost $18.5 trillion in savings over 10 years, we're not going to get it done. You say this all the time. Yeah. If you pick a goal that we're not going to get done, then you're just going to give up on the goal. So we used to have a big kind of bumper sticker campaign, and the theory was, or the whole slogan was, go big. I've changed. I've adapted to the times, and we're all about go incremental. But we will get there step by step. So 3% is sort of the first step, and we've got a lot of people who are agreeing that every budget that's put out should achieve that 3%.
Right before you leave 3%, you did not mention that the Secretary of the Treasury during the campaign talked about this.
That's where it started. Secretary Bessent put out this excellent idea, and so it's been embraced by Democrats, Republicans, the House, the Senate, Ray Dalio, business leaders. President Obama had liked 3%, so this is pretty broad-based support. And I think we'll continue to see new ways to make it more enforceable. So the next step is we'll pick annual debt targets, and if they don't get achieved, you'll have default mechanisms.
What's the time frame? Is it several years?
I think it should be 10 years to be reasonable, and then hopefully we can do it faster.
Yeah, I think it's 10 trillion to get from 6 post-war, post-pandemic levels, debt and peace and prosperity. Shame, shame, shame. But we can get there. 10 trillion in savings, that's
$1 trillion a year.
That's more realistic than 18 trillion. Growth will be a part of it, obviously. In the Bessent 333 was 3 million more barrels of oil. Energy policy has to be right, and all the various pieces of the pro-growth agenda. And then you have to have some constraint on spending. But that 3%, I will fight like a dog, a crazy mangy dog, to have the next budget framework, to have the 3% as the goal and the deficit to GDP as the measure of success. It is a more meaningful measure than nominal savings. In 17, when I was a freshman, Trump just got here, it was 5 trillion to balance the budget in 10 years, and now it's 18 trillion. We're set the realistic goals, set the right measures of success, and then I think we can all work together to get there. Democrats may have a different strategy. When they have unified leadership, we may have a different strategy, but we all ought to have a blood oath that those benchmarks on the way to 3%. I think it's realistic, Joe.
No, I think the bond market is going to set the tone. I think it's going to hit us hard. I really do. And I think basically everything we talk about, what we'd like to do, but then we don't have the courage to do it in the political arena today. I think the reality is going to hit us from the market end.
And regularly you hear people saying, well, it's going to take a crisis. And that may well be true, but it really shouldn't. And the fact is, it is all of our jobs to make sure that we don't do it out of crisis, that instead we do it this way. It's the point you were making about the budgets is we've stopped budgeting, we've stopped looking at trade-offs. But if Republicans show how they'd get to 3% and Democrats, progressive Democrats have one way to get to 3% and moderates have another, then we can compare it and have like an actual discussion about the trade-offs instead of pretending it's
Jody,
that
on
you
the
can
Senate
borrow
side,
forever.
what I did, Mike Crapo, I told Mike Crapo, what happened? We used to be 5 years. They give you a bill, remember, 5 years. They tell CBO give you a budget, and you said, we want to do this. And they said, well, fine. That'll be $800 billion. Okay, $800 billion over 5 years, they have to find pay for us. Do this. Everything's guesstimates to a certain extent, okay? So they said, well, this is what you have to do. So we do that. And then basically you do what you want to do in the bill, $800 billion. What they didn't tell you, now they went to 10 years. So now they do it for 10-year cycle versus 5 years, which just added more and more strain to the whole deficit situation we have. So at 10 years, let's say you do a $2 trillion bill, big bill, $2 trillion. And over 10 years, you say, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to do all these things, social reforms. And I'll just give you BBB. BBB was a $10 trillion deal if it was a penny. It was always a $10 trillion bill. And the reason it was is we used to give everything, everything was given away. There was no accountability, responsibilities. And the thing that happened is, so it whittled it down. Bernie came to me and says, Joe, that's it's scored at $6 trillion, we're going to turn it to 3. I said, Bernie, all you're doing is basically changing the time element. Here's how it works. If we say it's going to be a $3 trillion bill, and we are going to do it for 10 years, and we do all these programs, guess what? Within the first 3 years, we've used all $3 trillion because it was so popular. Now, guess what? The next 7 years, deficit spending. We finance it through debt because we have spending authority for 10. We only had income based on the 3 years we ran out. So I told Mike Crapo, I said, Mike, just put a bill in. When you hit the CBO score, you stop. If it's that popular and you want to do it, you go back and reappropriate. That would stop all this add-on debt. Because there's no way, you all, the public should be saying, how in the heck do you guys tell us you're going to pay for every bill and you have pay-fors, and yet you added up $20-30 trillion of debt? How did it happen? That's how it happened.
Yeah.
And no one wants to change that.
Neither side pays for it. That's
exactly right.
We lie to ourselves. We lie to the American people. We believe our rhetoric during the campaign. Very few will follow through on it. Joe's right. God bless you for taking the big, whatever, we got all these acronyms, the BBB, and because I think we'd have had a meltdown. I mean, the bond market, we had 1.1% interest on our 10-year. At the beginning of Biden, it was 4.6 at the end. We all know what the prices did in terms of inflation, the inflation rate. But I think it would have been a full-on meltdown had you not intervened in that.
Well, what we did on the IRA, they talk about Inflation Reduction Act. We've produced, the United States of America has produced more energy since 2023 than anybody in the world. 2023, 2024, 2025, we're producing more energy than anybody in the world's ever produced. And politically, the Democrats couldn't even say about that because they thought it was an environmental bill. That IRA bill was done strictly for us to help our allies overseas when Russia declared war on Ukraine and shut down the energy going into Europe. That was it.
But the other side of that equation, unless I just leave you with what the Democrats did to inflation because it's not as much fun to talk about what the Democrats, the results of some of their policies. You go to the Republican side and we say we're going to come in, we're going to grow the economy, and we're going to grow it to 5%, 10%, 100%. We're going to tax cut, and you're going to love it. They're going to be big and beautiful. And they're all going to just magically pay for themselves. That's the Santa Claus on our end. Just be clear about that, okay?
Yeah.
And I pushed back on some of this fantasy in my world. Not all tax cuts are created equally. Not all of them have the dynamic feedback and bring the revenue to the Treasury. Some do more than others. The bonus depreciation, the business expensing, 100% immediate and permanent. That's a big one. Not all of them are like that, but we treated all of them like that. So I think for the Democrats, for their end, they come in, they'll talk about all the various programs they want to do to solve social problems. Don't worry, we'll tax the millionaires and billionaires. And I'll have Bessent come over tomorrow, and I'll ask him the question, did the Democrats have a millionaire or billionaire tax when they had full control of Congress? And the answer will be no, they didn't. But then you go over to the Republicans and they say, we're going to give everybody their tax stuff. This is our way of giving back, okay, and popular policy. Then my question is, I'm for cutting taxes, keep them as low as we can. But but it needs to be commensurate with the cost structure of this $7 trillion government and growing. So we talk big about cutting the taxes. We say it's a spending problem. It's a spending problem, stupid. Except for we never cut the spending commensurate with what we want to do to give people their hard-earned dollar back, et cetera, and keep us growing as an economy. So both sides are guilty. It is a math problem. And I hope at least people will have the courage to talk about this in a way that have an honest conversation with the American people. I think they will come along because they see leadership in a guy like Joe Manchin. They see leadership. They're hungry for it. And grandmothers and grandfathers, they don't want their grandchildren to suffer on account of our inability to step up.
They'll pay $5 a gallon if it's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. It's a hardship. People would pay it if there was something at the end result.
They'll also
if you're
put
getting
money
something.
back into Social Security. Often when I go out and talk to people, don't bring up means testing if you don't need the benefits. Someone will raise their hands and say, I actually don't need it. I would like to give it back so that it'll be there for my kids and grandkids. And sometimes I feel like we're treated as though people don't want to be part of the solution. And they do.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the point I think you were just making is both parties seem to have taken the worst habits of the other party, where it used to be Democrats would raise taxes, Republicans would cut spending. Now, neither of them really want to do either anymore. No. Democrats love tax cuts. Republicans seem to like spending and protecting entitlements, and nobody is talking about the real stuff.
But this is why some kind of constraint is necessary.
But the Social Security tax, I mean, right now, in West Virginia,
Well said.
our state pays 100%. 100% of the people just about pay, because we have very few people making over the, what is it now?
26.
180.
180.
180, okay, so we might have.
Maximum taxable.
But we're way up there. Some states, maybe 50, 60%. Just taking that cap up a little bit, just raising the cap on that. They said, well, that's going to be a tax on the wealthy. Well, the wealthy, no one misses that tax. And the wealthy don't pay taxes on earned income, okay? They pay differently.
But maybe you both, since you've been the leads on the fiscal commission, should also talk about why it seems like there's a lot of momentum around a commission.
Well, the commission has to, the trust has, but one of the two things have to be done. You cannot continue down the road being blind. And that's what they're doing. They won't, I mean, it'll hit us so hard. There won't be any way to say, okay, how do we fix this?
I mean, the BRAC, a lot of people on my team told me don't talk about the BRAC.
Talk about it, go ahead.
They said don't talk about the BRAC as the example. But here's what I like about the BRAC. There were hard decisions made.
Yeah.
Hey, Lubbock, Texas, the population center in my hometown and my district lost a base. But if that was the right thing for our country, and to right-size our defense, investment in infrastructure, et cetera, so be it, okay? We got too many single-member district-minded people anyway, okay? That's another reason we've driven this unsustainable deficit. Let's get thoughtful people again in the room. Let's get credible outside folks, and let's come up with the specific strategies to bring the 3 to 6 or 6 to 3. But let's get it to the floor without the 10 or 20 or 100 ways that leadership and others can kill really good bills, and let's have an up or down vote. I suspect that an up or down vote to save Social Security, if that's part of it, and I think it should be, I suspect that people will do the right thing.
Bowles-Simpson would have passed. Bowles-Simpson would have passed if Obama hadn't put such high criteria to it. Bowles-Simpson, I think it needed, what, 2/3? Max would know, what? 2/3? 12 out of 18. It was almost, we don't do anything on those numbers. Yeah. But the bottom line is where would we be with Bowles-Simpson today if we'd have had it then? We would have never it would have never allowed us to do this, what we've done. When you start thinking. So there were some good ideas back then that quite a few people agreed with. I don't know why we just don't look. I mean, we're trying to reinvent the wheel again. We've done some things. Basically, the 1997, John Kasich and Max they all worked on it back then.
Joe, this is why both your commission and Jody's being statutory makes a lot more sense. Because Simpson was not.
Timing's a lot of it, Rob. That's
and then it has to go to the floor.
Timing.
Has to go to the floor for
The
up or
other
down
benefit of the commission, this is something you both have done. It's not coincidental. I think the people who are willing to work with the other party are the ones who care about fiscal, because you can never do it only on your party. It's just too hard. But you get to know your colleagues. You get to know the folks and what matters to them on the other side of the aisle. You build a little trust, and you build political cover. And in this political
but also
environment,
if the commission,
it seems like that'll be.
If yours is written the same way. If the commission has agreement, if the commission agrees in a bipartisan way,
it goes to the floor.
It's priority. And the Senate goes by priority with no 65 votes. Boom, we go right to the floor.
Yes.
really important.
Up or down vote. That's the only thing I think is going to save us.
That's right. So there's some bipartisan threshold. You mentioned 12 out of the 18, but once that threshold's been met or exceeded, it goes expedited consideration on the floor, both houses, no games, just up or down. I think, look, we passed this with bipartisan support. That was not planned in the sense that we wanted bipartisan support, but we were in the middle of other negotiations, and the Democrat leader, this is why Scott Peters and Jimmy Panetta, and I could list some others, are heroes to me. They broke away from their party leadership, and my ranking member didn't support it, but I think in spirit he does, and with in the right conditions he will.
I remember the debate we had in your committee when I testified on it.
Listen, our speaker's committed to this. I can say this, with full confidence that he is committed to doing this. He understands that this is ultimately going to be the path to do the hard things that we won't unilaterally do, right? We've already proven that. We've proven that theory, that we will not cut the spending problem we say we have, and Democrats won't tax their way out of this issue. We're going to have to come together. And I remember the flack I got from some of my conservative friends for putting revenue in the mix. My Democrat colleagues would not have thought it was a credible process if I didn't explicitly mention revenue. And I have no problem. I got no problem with that. AEI shouldn't have a problem with that. But Ronald Reagan, my hero, didn't have a problem with that when he worked with Tip O'Neill. I'm not saying that should be the larger portion of the solution. I'm just saying we ought to have everything on the table when you have $40 trillion in debt, $140 trillion unfunded liability 30 years into the future. This game's over. Farm bills, we're talking about a housing bill, talking about defense and fiscal space to deal with Iran or something else that's going to come our way. We better get serious and be adults and do the right thing.
Jody, on the sensitive
bless
issue
America.
of revenue, Mark, who hasn't had a chance to get back in here much, will tell us that the issue, when you look at it objectively over the last 50 years, has really been on the spending side, not on the tax side. That our taxes as a percent of our economy have stayed relatively the same, but spending has gone up. However, I would say two things to that, and then I'll let Mark talk. One is, as a practical political matter, Jimmy Panetta would not have been able to support it without it. In other words, we're not going to get Democrats on support it. And second, we're too deep in the hole. In other words, we've got to do everything and do it in a smart way, because economic growth is a key part of the solution.
That's right.
But Mark, you want to talk about that for a second? Spending?
Yeah, well, I'll mention a couple of things. I mean, the spending obviously comes from, part of it comes from the demographics as the population ages. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid become more expensive. The other part of it is, which I think Senator Daines referred to, is part of it comes from the expansion of the government in healthcare. That it used to be that a government covered about maybe 25 to 33% of all healthcare spending. With Obamacare and other expansions of benefits, both on Medicare and Medicaid, and the exchanges, we're now pretty much, the government is paying about half of healthcare spending. And healthcare spending is gone up, both because of the demographics, but also because of the very inefficient sector. It's very inefficient. The productivity gains that we see elsewhere in the economy have not come to healthcare at all. So, I mean, that increases relative prices in healthcare. So I actually think Senator Daines' idea of sort of applying AI to healthcare is an excellent idea. It will be very beneficial to the budget. The problem is that there are no incentives in the system to do that. We do have the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation that is supposed to deal with these issues to try to encourage these innovations, but they have done a very poor job.
Let me say one thing on healthcare. The healthcare thing, and I, when we were doing all this Affordable Care Act and everything, and talked about, I have a lot of poverty, a lot of poor people in parts of West Virginia. So I said, you really realize how a poor person gets their health care before affordable health care, for Obamacare. And I said, first of all, if they're working above the poverty guidelines, 25 to 75,000, that's the income and poverty that people are trying to basically live with some dignity and pride, but they can't afford the copay at wherever they work. So they forego that. And basically they use the emergency room. The emergency room is their delivery system. They use it uncontested, them and their children. And then if they get hurt at home or something, they go in and claim workers' comp. So they're using the system. This is how they've used it forever. Now all of a sudden, we come and give them a government. This is it. We put no guardrails on it. There was no limits. Their still mind is, I can go anytime I want, and someone's going to pay. That's what knocked it completely out and threw the numbers so far out of whack that they can't figure out, okay, what do we do now? How do we cut it back? I said, free care in different countries is not free. There's responsibilities. You abuse it, you'll lose it. They keep thinking, oh, you can just go and do anything you want. You can't. They schedule you when you can do certain things and how you're going to be preventive care and things of this sort. We do nothing to basically give incentives. We give you an incentive to basically drive your car safe, if you have your home safe. If everything we do, we give you incentives, except how you take care of yourself. And if you do that, you get no savings whatsoever. The whole mindset, and we can't shop. When I was governor, I started a program called Compare Care. I said, just give me the most tonsillectomy, appendectomy, things of this sort. And then give me every hospital in my state, and I want them to list how they charge, called Compare Care. They went nuts. We're not going, no, we can't do that. It harms the quality of care. It doesn't. I said, wait a minute. My wife was born with a gene, a shopping gene. I swear to God, you let her look at something, she'll shop it, she'll figure it out. And I said, why do we take absolutely that consumer out of the consuming and comparing in healthcare? We have basically just propped it up and got it to the point we're not able to keep pace. Healthcare will outstrip everything. And then basically, the end of life as we get older, we use up more than anybody. 70 years and on, by God, we just suck it all up. But we've got to get real about a lot of things, and it's going to basically take people that are putting country before party. The parties, I go back to George Washington, to my favorite. George Washington said, beware of the political parties because they can become the engines that lets unscrupulous men usurp the power from the people. That was his farewell speech. But then Churchill's the best. Churchill, when he was trying, his cabinet was on him in 1940, 1941. When are you going to get your buddy FDR? When are you going to get the Americans involved? And he told his cabinet, they're all sitting at the table. He says, don't you ever worry about our friends across the pond. He says, the Americans will always do the right thing once they've tried everything else. And that's the truth. We have tried everything else and screwed it up. So now it's time to fix it.
He also said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And that's one of our issues is, it's tough in a democracy. You can't
Socialism
just
is
be
great until you run out of the people's money.
Yeah. Maggie Thatcher.
Maggie said that one, yeah.
Okay, so I think Joe is absolutely right. If we don't solve health care, ultimately we can't solve this problem.
Yeah, that's all.
It really is what drives us into bankruptcy. But having said that, as a realistic matter, we're talking about a fiscal commission that might come up, just trying to get back to brass tacks here. Maybe the 3% is maybe part of that.
A new metric.
A new metric that we haven't talked about before. It's less ambitious than some of the metrics that have been talked about, including in some of the legislation that all of us have supported. But Maya, take us kind of to the next step in this. Like, what happens? Let's assume that we can get a fiscal commission signed into law, and let's assume that we start down that track. How long does it take, and how do you get it done?
Wait, I'm taking us through the scenario of the fiscal commission or the no commission and we have a crisis.
Well, you've already done that. I was adequately depressed after that. So give us sort of the positive scenario if there were to be a fiscal commission. Again, not everything we need, not the healthcare reforms that we need, and not the the higher percentage.
There's a couple different ways it could work. There could be a Social Security only commission or a comprehensive budget commission. And frankly, I'll take whatever people want to do, right? Both of them would be great. I think we've talked a little bit about the benefits of them, that the lawmakers dig deeper into the issue. And once you dig into the issue, there's no walking away. There's no turning your back on it, because the only people who think it's not a problem haven't really dug into it and seen the real threats.
Mike, you think in the first year it would make sense for that commission to focus on the public information and just letting people know what the problem is, since there's so little information out there?
Exactly. So I think the only way that this works is also if in companion with a fiscal commission, you do a public education effort. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Because I think we need to have, right now, people really care about this issue, but they'll believe a free lunch if you sell them one, like if you promise them one, but a little bit of education goes a long way. And so if you have strange bedfellows who don't agree with each other on everything, and outside experts from all different areas going out and
We're all
talking
willing
about
to
this,
agree what the problem is.
who say what the problem is, talk about different solutions, and acknowledge something. There's no one right answer. We all have different opinions. That's okay. We're going to have to compromise. But if we kind of build this inside-outside game, I think that's what builds the momentum. People know you can't borrow your way to prosperity. They know we have to make changes. I think what we've learned in the past is that they need to know that you'll actually fix the problem. If they're going to do something hard, they want to know there's a fix, and they want to know it's fair. They want to feel like they're not the only sliver of the population that's having to pay and everybody else is getting off. So I think we set that up. I think one really important thing is to avoid the poison pill of people putting on the commission people who want to blow it up. And one great idea I've heard from other Democratic leadership, pick the Republican members. But you really want to bring in people who actually want to fix the problem.
As a member of the super committee, I can tell you there was some of that. I won't say who it was, but Joe knows
You've
what I'm talking
experienced
about.
that.
He wasn't on it because of that.
Oh, I knew that. What about flat rate? Let's throw that out there.
Flat rate tax?
Jody,
I'm all for it.
you all talk about that any
Yeah,
of
yeah, sure we do.
Everybody pays, right? Everybody pays something.
I've said it, I thought I was going to lose my opportunity to be a Ways and Means member when I said it to the chairman as a guy campaigning, steering, through the steering committee for it. I said in that TCJA, I said, what about making sure that everybody actually has ownership over this great country?
Right.
How about everybody feeling like it's not this half that owns the country and this half rents the country? And so I think, it's all obviously relative and as a percentage and recognizing those who are struggling to work and pay the bills. But I think every proud American wants to participate. So that is a principle that I've always espoused. But, in some ways our tax code is more progressive.
We took the corporate rate from 35 to 21, right?
Yeah.
And we thought everyone was paying, be tickled to pay 21. We found out there's quite a bit wasn't paying 6, 7, 8%. We tried to put a minimum floor of 15 on, they went nuts.
Listen, I love that. You can still make the argument that the top 1, top 10 are still paying, the 40% top 1, I think it's 70% top 10%. I just don't think that's a good setup. If we can talk about the most fair and competitive ways to set the tax code up so that we, again, the ownership principle, but also so that we're growing. I think these are things that should be meted out, by the way, with people like yourself and others on this debt commission. And by the way, nobody...
Is it too much to do in a commission? I mean, the notion of a sales tax is the other thing. We live in a developed country that doesn't have some kind of a consumption tax. Mark would tell us it's much more efficient. Right, Mark?
It is.
Thank you. And a way to raise money without hurting people if you have some sort of help, to people below a certain income. But that's a lot to take on, isn't it?
Well, the whole concept of what he just said was basically, it's correct. How many people get more than what they pay in from government?
But it's also a great way to simplify the system. So right now, we all love the tax breaks, right? When it comes to April 15th and you get to take your deductions and exemptions, exclusions, you like them. But that's where all the complexity comes from. Yeah. And if we actually got rid of the $25 trillion in tax expenditures on the individual side over the next decade, we could bring rates down tremendously and still generate trillions of new revenue. So there are some win-wins because our tax code is so horrible as it is.
We need to simplify it. It must be, the average person, everyone should pay something. Everyone should say, I own this. The same things we talked about, every 18-year-old should give 1 year of service to the country. One way or another. I said, in a poor country, in a poor state, that's a gap year. Let them take a gap year after high school because they can't afford to take one any other time. So the bottom line, they learn a little bit more about the country and give something back because no one knows. We're not teaching any civics in schools no more, nothing. It's just awful.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get off on civics, because I like that.
I know, it's a lot of things. It's all.
We've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to be sure that how much time do we have? We have less or more? Less. How much less? Oh my gosh. Oh no, we're just getting into it.
Man, this has been,
damn.
We're just starting to loosen up. We're finally telling you the truth.
We've got the solutions.
Finally. All right, well, I was going to get into the states issue, so we're going to get into this in future panels. But Joe made a good point earlier, which is the states have balanced budgets. You have a balanced budget in your life. Companies have balanced budgets. So could you bring some pressure onto Washington from the states? And we'll have that discussion later.
100%.
It sounds like.
You're
Any
going
closing comments from everybody? I'm going to go
I'd
right
like to
down the line.
comment
Jody?
just quickly on the state issue. The states created this federal government, not the other way around. There is a runaway federal government going on a number of fronts, not the least of which is the issue we're talking about here. I don't know if it's true that the 22nd Amendment, the term limit on the presidency, came as a result of the rattling of the sabers of an Article 5 convention. But I mean, like we've talked about, I think Senator Dane said, we've tried everything. Is this body politic have the courage?
Yeah.
Or are we going to have a crisis? Well, there is the break glass in case of emergency built in, that our framers in their wisdom built into this system and that Article 5 convention. And I think whether they get all the way there, they're going to talk about how many applications that we had. It's one of the biggest, most shocking set of facts that was presented to me, that we've, in some people's minds and mine, that we met the threshold,
Already there.
that Congress didn't act. So I'm all for that, whether we go all the way and get the fiscal responsibility amendment, or we just pressure Congress to finally step up, do these things that we're talking
With some
about.
leverage.
Either way, I think we win for the country, so I'm all for that.
Maya, final comments.
My final comment is the single most important thing that we have to do is unify this country. We are so divided and so obsessed with spending time sort of being at each other. We are not solving the really big problems that face us, the debt
Amen.
clearly being one of them, and we've got to get back to where we're willing to compromise. Nobody gets everything they want, but these problems are real, and this country is going to need to address them, and we can do it. It's easily within our ability to get it done, but we have to start working together as one country.
Good point. Joe?
Mine very quickly would be the quality of the character and the candidates we're getting today. Closed primaries is horrible because basically the parties control it. You have open primaries, they don't get so radical, don't destroy each other. You can do a lot more if you basically give everyone a chance to participate. 50% of us are no party affiliation. I chose to be an independent because I like both sides, but I dislike a lot of things on both sides, but I can work with both sides. You can't do that because you have identified in Washington, have a D or an R, you're automatically on the other side. Not just by guilt by association, you can be guilt by conversation. Jody and I worked across the aisle. We had great camaraderie. It worked well, but that is not acceptable within the caucuses. The parties have gotten so strong to where they're controlling how we basically run our government. And it's a representative form of democracy. I'm disenfranchised. I can't vote in my state in the primary because they closed the primaries down. They want to get who they want. And I ask people every day, I said, do you believe you have a right to vote because you're a United States citizen or because you belong to a party? And they say, oh, because I'm a citizen. I said, no, you don't. The party's picking you. You're not picking the party. You're not picking the party's picking who they want you to elect.
The Commission on Primary Reform is coming next.
Primary reform's got to be, it's got to be big. And also the balanced budget amendment, Lauren's going to be here, I think, in the second or third tranche you have here. They're moving. They got 28 or 29 states already signed up. They need about 6 or 7 more, and baby, we're gone. It's gone then, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, good. Mark, final
Yeah,
comments.
well, I was going to say that I've seen in just in the last few years, there have been so many legislative but not paid for increases on spending, and then there's sort of a list of spending on Social Security, increases for government retirees, cut in taxes on Social Security benefits, increases in veterans' disability benefits, multi-employer pension bailouts, increase in Medicare drug benefits, and we've discussed the lack of Social
About the
Security.
PACT Act.
Yeah, so I think clearly we need fiscal rules that work. These policies, which may or may
Some
not
guardrails.
have been good or not, but they weren't paid for, which is outrageous.
Listen, what valuable insights we've gotten from this team. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you, buddy.
Great start. Great start. Thank you, Rob, very much. That was outstanding. We will reconvene at 4:22. 4:22 for the next panel. Alex Brill, Jim Crepetta, Senator Baucus, Governor Kasich, Dave Walker. Thank
We're going to sit. I am sure that my colleagues are tracking down our fellow panelists as we speak. Sidebar in the hallway. Well, I don't want to reward tardiness. So I'm just going to give people another 30 seconds and we're going to kick off with or without them. They're coming? All right. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us. All right. I want to thank everyone for coming back for the second panel. My name is Alex Brill. I'm a senior fellow here at the American Enterprise Institute, where I study fiscal policy broadly, primarily tax policy. I think our first session was excellent. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Portman, for moderating. And I think we're all here because we have a general awareness and understanding and concern of the issue. And I think we were able to dig a little bit deeper and be refreshed on some of the significance of the problem that we face, and to hear from current and one former lawmakers about the perspective that the legislatures bring to this issue, as well as the facts and evidence that my colleague Mark Warshawski was able to contribute. I want to continue along that path, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into the solutions of this issue. But I want to think about this problem in a couple of different perspectives. And if you'll indulge me for a second, I'm reminded, and some people in this room may know this person, I suspect. There was a woman who worked for CRS for her whole career named Judy Schneider. And Judy Schneider was an expert in legislative process. And she both gave tremendous lectures and teaching to new congressional staffers and did a great job in live markups and hearings on both the House side and the Senate side. And Judy, she's no longer with us, but she really influenced a lot of people's understanding of the legislative process. And she always talked about the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps were policy, politics, and procedure. And she said, if you can have one of those, but if you don't have all of those, you're not doing anything. You have the greatest policy in the idea in the world, but if you don't have the politics behind that policy idea, it doesn't matter. And so Judy would teach this to basically every new congressional staffer. And at one point, I was that new congressional staffer, and Judy made a big impression on me. And so I want to sort of think about our fiscal challenges through that lens of policy, but also the perspective of politics and procedure. We talked about those 3 pieces in the last session. I want to talk about them a little bit more here today. Let me just very briefly introduce our speakers. I'll name them in alphabetical order. We have former Senator Max Baucus from the state of Montana. He's our second Montanan here today. This is perhaps a very important issue in the state of Montana. Senator Baucus is also former U.S. ambassador to China under President Obama. So he brings a lot of international perspective, which he may lend to this conversation as well. I'll say as an aside, I had an opportunity to sit across the table from Senator Baucus in a number of meetings when I worked on the House side, on the House Ways and Means Committee. My colleague, Jim Capretta, is here. Jim is the Milton Friedman Chair at AEI, and he's a former OMBer who worked extensively on health policy issues, as well as a former Hill staffer. Governor Kasich, former governor from the state of Ohio, of course, and a former House member. Governor Kasich was the first Republican chairman of the House Budget Committee in 40 years when he took the gavel in 1995. At that time, when Republicans took control of the House, there were no Republican members of the House in 1995 who had ever served in the majority. It was only a few years later that the budget was balanced. Coincidence or not, we can discuss. And to my immediate right, David Walker. And David Walker served for a long time as the Comptroller General of the United States, the head of the GAO, first government, the Government Accountability Office. Had a prior name in the beginning, but Government Accountability Office. And I appreciate you all for being with us today. And with that, let's just jump into some of the substance here. So I want to start by talking about what type of fiscal problem we have. And in broad terms, do we have a spending problem? Do we have a revenue problem? Do we have an entitlement problem? Do we have a general outlay problem? Do we have a tax problem? I'll start with you, Governor. How would you characterize the nature of the fiscal problem that we face today?
You can't be serious. It's a disaster. But look, the problem that we have is not it's a character issue. The people really want to do something to serve their country, or they are here just kind of skating. That's the question. And so I came here because my great friend Greg Wendt asked me to be here, and Maya McGinnis is here, and she and I spend a lot of time talking about things. There's just no will. I mean, if you want, look, I spent 10 years to get us to a balanced budget, and we did it with a team, and there was the will. Jim was there. He was working on the healthcare side of things, but we just didn't care about politics. It was just about, let's get it done. When I became governor, we were 20% in the hole. I mean, I inherited a deficit, which was, dealt with in the first year. We knew what we wanted to do, and then we just went ahead and did it. So, I mean, do we have a spending problem? Of course we do. Do we have a tax problem? I don't think so, because, I mean, any solution is going to require compromise. But the problem with taxes is, if you put taxes in, they'll spend it, and they won't get to the real thing. So if you want to have taxes for 9 years, you should have spending, and then the 10th year, you should do that. But I wanted to introduce a new idea here that'll make some of you gasp. But I'm now in favor, and have been pushing, and I talked to Maya about this, the Trump Amendment. The Trump Amendment that calls for a constitutional balanced budget. Now, why would I say the Trump Amendment? Should be pretty obvious. I didn't call it some other name in the front of the amendment. I called it the Trump Amendment because it would be a legacy matter for him, and it would require him to do nothing, and would give him something to do over time. And it would get you closer to your 34 states. I don't know that it will go there, but you have Max Baucus here, and the question is, are Democrats willing to realize this problem? Joe Manchin, I think he's a Democrat. He might be an independent. I love Joe. He was my first guest on my radio show. But the fact of the matter is that Democrats have to say, yeah, this is really a problem. And I don't think any of that's going to happen until the public understands this is a problem. And I think trying to come up with solutions to something now, people think things are fine. We've been running around, me included, saying that the sky is falling as long as I've been around public life. And then people go, well, my 401k is good, the stock market's good, all this is good. So the first thing you have to do is to explain the problem, define the problem, and get the public to say it's a problem. And if they say it's a problem, and we have some courageous people who are willing to actually be public servants in office, we can fix it. It'll probably take, Maya and I have talked about this, probably take about 20 years. if you get on a downward cycle, right, Maya? If you can go over time, markets would react immediately, things would be positive, and we could move in the right direction. So
Governor, you're saying that the problem is character, it's will, it's desire, it's awareness, it's a motivation.
Yeah.
But you can't vote for those things, right? You can only vote for policy changes. So we're not yet at the stage where we're ready to talk about public policy changes?
it's a waste of time. Until you get to yourself to the point where the public says we have a problem and you have people that have character, the rest of this is pointless. I've been there, I've lived it, and I've achieved the things that I've talked about here. So until the public really gets this and said, we better do something about it, and that requires an education issue, which is why I like the Trump amendment, because that guy can educate like no one else can. I'm afraid that the Democrats wouldn't run the other way, because I don't think they need to, because it's an issue that we all who are responsible know is a problem. And yeah, I mean, you start talking about, okay, I'm going to go to the dentist and I'm going to have a root canal, and by the way, I don't even think I need one. So define what the problem is, explain it to people, and then go. Now, I don't want to go on here because I'm one of the big panel, but what happened with us is the Clinton administration realized this was a problem. When we did our contract with America, we said we were going to balance the budget. I had already been introducing budgets myself since 1989, I think. So we were ready. They wanted to do it. We wanted to do it. We felt it was necessary. It was in the contract. The administration had some people that were concerned about the debt, and it got done. And then soon after we got it done, the Republicans started spending the money again. That's why you need a constitutional amendment. The same is true with the states. You have to balance your budget. You can't fool around with that. So that's understood. So that's why people go, okay, well, I guess it has to happen. That's what we need to get to.
Let me turn to you, David, and ask you a similar question. If you think that, the question I guess really is, where are we in the process of moving towards the moment where we start to do things that make the world different? Are we, as the governor is suggesting, I think, just at the talking stage, or are we further down the road and it's time for policymakers to start to act?
I think we could have a debt crisis within 3 to 5 years. If we have a debt crisis, it's called a global depression. It'll be felt around the world. If you want to read more about it, go to nolabels.org, look at Nightmare on Main Street. I'm one of the contributing authors to that. Tells you what it would look like. We don't want that. I agree with the governor that the biggest deficit we have is a leadership deficit, lack of will. I would also say that it's going to take two things for us to restore fiscal sanity and sustainability. Number one, we're going to have a statutory commission that learns from Simpson-Bowles. Simpson-Bowles did good work, but there were several fundamental problems. Number one, it took 78% agreement, not 2/3, 78% agreement in order for them to be able to get a vote on their proposals. Secondly, it was not statutory, which means by definition, the Congress and the President did not agree up front on a binding up or down vote if for some reason they were able to reach that 78%. Number three, most importantly, they did zero citizen education and engagement to be able to build the burning platform. Here's where we are, here's where we're headed, here's how we compare to others. By the way, here's what happens if you do nothing. If you don't do anything on Social Security, you have a 28% across the board cut in 2032, all right? So you have to do that. I agree with that. Until the people are informed and involved and start putting pressure. So you have to have a statutory. The last thing they did, which is a mistake, is they put their names on it. The last thing you want to do is put your names on something that you want legislators to embrace and pass. The second thing you have to have is the only thing that will restore fiscal sanity and sustainability is a constitutional amendment that will force the Congress to make tough choices, that will have targets, triggers, automatic enforcement mechanisms. We talked a little bit earlier about the 3%. Hey, look, I'm not going to be against reducing the deficit from 6% to 3%. Hey, but let's get serious. There's no enforcement mechanism. That's a feel-good kind of thing. Gee, I did something. I said I want to get it down to 3%, but there's no enforcement mechanism. We've got to have things where there are enforcement mechanisms if we want to save our future.
Okay. Jim, that makes me turn to you. David doubled down on the amendment as the drivers of strategically for getting us towards a balanced budget. Share your views on a balanced budget amendment.
Well, I hate to start on a sour note, but let's first of all, I'm very pleased to be here. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this. Obviously, I'm totally committed to the same objective of shaking up the political system to start dealing more seriously with this. I worry that the balanced budget amendment is in some ways a distraction. It'll consume all of the energy, and it will eventually divert the political attention from actually solving the problem to trying to pass an amendment that itself can be amended, watered down, balkanized, and made meaningless before it ever gets enacted. So I really would think that we want, as a political system, to focus. You could do much of what is desired from that through statute. If the Congress is the lawmaking chamber of our Constitution, they can write a law that says we should have as an objective something much tougher, and that there are consequences to it. You don't need a constitutional amendment. And by the way, we already have in place, Chairman Baucus had to deal with it all the time at the Finance Committee, we have in place a provision that is supposed to be doing this already, which I think is really underreported, which is that the trust funds get a bad name. People say, well, there's nothing in the trust funds, it's meaningless, et cetera. Those were created to provide a signal to the Congress. They were informational, of course, but they do have some real meaning, which is that they were created because this was the first time the Congress put in motion a permanent appropriation authority that was independent of a regularized annual review in a big way. And the trust funds are appropriations authority. When they run out, there is no money. I mean, there is a legal aspect to it. It's not just an accounting thing. Now, what we've done is say, well, let's just project into our baseline that this will go on forever. So very strangely, we've said in law, no, there is no more money. But then we have these panels, and we're all worried. It's going to go to 175% of GDP. Well, there's no law currently on the books that would allow that to happen. So the question is, what do we do about the trust funds? And that's coming in the next 5 to 10 years. So before we ever get to a constitutional amendment, I think we need to get serious about the contractual obligation we have with the public about managing these trust funds in a responsible, intergenerational way that takes them seriously. That we can't just sort of pretend like there's going to be money that doesn't exist, but they were there to require the Congress to manage this in a responsible way permanently. And they've gotten away from that in the last 30 years, but that was the norm, by the way, till about the turn of the century. And so I think a big part of this is to just get back to what are you going to do about Social Security and what are you going to do about Medicare?
And solving those problems basically solves all our problems?
It solves at least half, probably 2/3. So, forget about all the rest of it. The biggest problem in our budget are the entitlements, and they're underfinanced, and they're overcommitted. And so either you raise the revenue to pay for them, or you start to make adjustments on prospective benefit promises that scale them back. By the way, there's plenty of money in this country to take care of everybody who needs to be taken care of in a way that's responsible, but you just have to sort of schedule it and put it into law and manage it over time in a responsible way. And that's really what's been missing. You need to look out 5, 10, 20 years, redo the benefit commitments going forward for the prospective entrants, and set the tax rates accordingly so that it can be matched. I mean, I know it sounds simple, I'm making it sound overly simple, but truly, that's where all the money is. Promising benefits to the elderly, and cash benefits through Social Security, and health care benefits through Medicare. 75% of the money is attached to those two things, and we've overcommitted. So let's figure out how to recalibrate it to get it back under control, and very substantially, much of the pressure would start to ease.
Senator Baucus, when you sort of rank the problems that we're facing, do you say first, as the governor said, that we have a character problem? Do you think first, that we have an information problem, that people don't appreciate this issue, as David was describing? Or do you think that we have a trust fund problem, we have a money in, money out problem, or something else? How do we pick from that list, or what's first on your list in terms of describing
It's right next to your seat there.
the first?
Down underneath.
There it is.
Ta-da!
Well, I think Maya said it best in the last panel. It's really a trust problem. It's not trust fund, it's trust. It's a trust among members of Congress. There's no trust. But trust between the legislative and executive branch, there's no trust. People and their elected representatives, not much trust. It's a trust problem. People just, these days, don't trust one another. I remember, it was a few years ago, when I was in the Senate, there were some real statesmen on both sides of the aisle. Bob Dole, for example, Jack Danforth, Sam Nunn. There are a bunch of them. They're really statesmen who listened to the other side. The main thing is they wanted to work together. They wanted to get solutions. They trusted each other. Now, they trusted each other in part because they spent a lot of time together. There were Codels, and that helps. It cements trust. Families got together. There was a Senate dining room where senators could meet, no staff, no spouses, and that's gone now. It's been gone for 20 years. Why? Because senators are out raising money. They're at their political meetings, and there's no bond. There's no trust. And so the real question is, how do you build that back up? I remember Andy Young years ago once said to me, "Now, Max, you could have all these fancy diagrams and flow charts and so forth, and organization charts. They really don't matter much. What really matters is the character and the quality of the people. If you've got really good people, irrespective to some degree of the organizational chart, they'll figure out a way to do what's right. But you need really good, solid people to make that happen." And this is a strong statement to make, but in my judgment, some of those senators who I mentioned earlier, when they retired, were replaced by others who had all the answers. Not listening, but had the answers. They're ideologues, more ideological on both sides of the aisle. It's just a natural phenomenon. The Senate got televised. There's lots of things happened to diminish some of the trust that existed back then between and among senators. I think the internet is a big factor here. It's causing more distrust in the country, the world. Social media, we burrow down our little holes and rat holes. We just listen to people that we like and so forth. Don't listen to the others. But it shortens attention spans. All new internet media does. There's less critical thinking. We got a problem, frankly, in this country.
How new is that?
And I think to some degree, President Trump's exacerbated it. He's accelerated it. Basically, it's because it's either my way or the highway. You don't go my way. I've never seen any president exact such retribution and vindication as this president. It just makes it even worse. Parties just don't trust each other. So put that aside for a moment. Another question is informational. My thought is that we have a presidential election coming up in 28. I think it's important for all of us to try to get the presidential candidates to start talking about the problem. Ronald Reagan did. And as has been pointed out, he worked with Tip O'Neill. So the problem was identified, and they worked together. It's pretty simple, but that's what happened here. So if the presidential candidates, especially the Republicans, who are campaigning for president in 28, talk about this more and more, and maybe it's who's got the better idea how to address that. I think that would help. Another problem here is another idea I had is and how to get people's attention to all this is the business community. Right now, the business community is high in the hog, basically. Markets are doing great. The country's economy is doing well. in my experience, frankly, the Senate is it's very disappointing. But when I would talk to CEOs of major companies, they didn't want to get involved in policy because they were afraid of offending stockholders, they're afraid of offending consumers. They just were afraid. They were not going to get involved. But if they were, BRT, for example, I pushed BRT on to get more active in various ways, and to some degree on the margin they have. But it's just somehow it'd be important for this group, others, to gauge the business community, say, hey guys, gals, this is real. So I would sum up by saying that I just think that all these ideas, I'm a little, how can I say this? I'm a little sanguine they're not going to work. They're too complicated. People don't understand them. And to some degree, Dick Cheney said, deficits don't matter anymore. Well, people think that. People think deficits don't matter anymore right now. They think that. Deficits are an abstraction. Abstraction is cruelty. Tax cuts, or tax increases or spending cuts, now that's concrete, that's real. But people, they've heard people talk about deficits and debts for years now, and nothing really happens. We've, like all those wonky folks, they just talk too much, nothing's really happened. My life's okay, it's all good, it's good. I'm not gonna get too excited about this. So the real challenge is to get people to get real. That's a huge challenge, a huge challenge. And the only way I can get at it, my only solution right now is to some degree is to have the presidential candidates get them going here and say, hey guys, you're not gonna get my endorsement unless you just talk about this. That's an approach.
Let me ask you just two really quick follow-ups. One on the trust issue on the political level, at the legislative level. How old is that problem? You crossed the aisle. You voted for a lot of bills that Republicans put together. Yeah. You weren't the only one. Sometimes you were, but there were few Democrats. There were Republicans that crossed over. We've had them on the last panel here. How new is this problem that there's this hyper-partisanship that nobody wants to cooperate? Is it 10 years old? Is it 25 years old? I mean,
well, I don't know. I got elected to Senate in 1978. It was great back then. But slowly over time, you could see this start to erode. Very slowly, but it did happen. You could just see it almost every different Congress. A lot of this is money. It's money, honey. I mean, it's members of Congress want to get reelected. That's number one, get reelected. They want to do the right thing, but getting reelected is pretty high up there, frankly. Yeah. And with the Supreme Court's decision on on campaign spending, there's unlimited dollars today to elect or unelect somebody. And most ads, frankly, are negative ads because negative ads move voters much more than do positive ads. Now, after many years of negative ads, people get kind of tuned out. That's not constructive. It's just the opposite. Guess how much was spent in my state, Montana, the last Senate election. It was Tim Sheehy, who's now a senator, ran against John Tester, the incumbent. This is Montana, population of 1 million people. Guess how much was spent on that campaign, all in. Campaign contributions that each raised,
how
PAC
much?
Money, dark money, purple money, you name it, all the money. Guess how much was spent? Now, John, you may know, John.
No, I don't know. Tell me, 'cause I know it's.
Well, guess.
I'm not guessing. I'm not guessing.
50 million.
400's closest. About 250 to 300 million for one Senate seat.
Count grizzly bears when you were.
No, we counted cows.
That's unbelievable.
It is. It was like your state, Ohio. That was too.
I want to say something about this, about the money. You see, in the old days, the parties, people don't know this, the old days, the parties used to be the ones, they screen the candidate, right, Senator? They'd help raise the money. Parties have nothing now. They don't raise any money, they don't screen anybody. And so what happens is somebody runs and they get all their money from the special interest groups. Now, I love this guy because he helped us get to a balanced budget, but I got to tell you, you think you can fix Medicare and Medicaid without fixing the entire healthcare system? And if you want to fix the entire healthcare system, you know who you're taking on? Hospitals, pharma, trial lawyers. I mean, but that's what has to happen. You want to fix the healthcare system, we have to have a healthcare system that has legitimate incentives for people to keep people healthy, not to treat them when they're sick. But we don't have that. It all has to be changed. But in order to change it, Senator, am I right? You're going to get all these people worked up for you. So I've actually come to the point where I'm for public financing of campaigns. Let me just put it to you this way, though. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to raise a certain amount of money before the capital markets will declare you legitimate. If you want to be a political candidate, you should have to raise a certain amount of money to declare yourself legitimate. Then anything above that, I'm for public financing. A Republican, conservative for that. Senator, I don't have any other answer than that because I don't want those special interest groups controlling what we're doing. Look at AI right now. We can't get an AI policy because all the bros out there have all the money, they're electing all these people, and it's ridiculous. And that's what is happening in this country. And Maya, you're going to come on. We're going to talk about that. No, the senator was just
David,
so
let me,
good in everything he said. I'm signing
thank
up.
you both.
And let me just
I'm signing up with you.
Real quick, Senator,
You're
and
not
I
going
want to take it back
You're not
to
going to
David.
sign up with my next point, though. If we're really here, we have to address another issue. Today, we spend maybe 2 or 3 times per capita on healthcare than the next most expensive country. And our outcomes are much lower than those other countries who spend much less per capita on healthcare. That's a fact. In fact, I think we spend about 17%, I think that's roughly the figure.
A little more.
More than that? 18, well, it's up there somewhere, on healthcare. So what's the solution? You're looking at the guy who essentially wrote the ACA. The Finance Committee had primary jurisdiction over the Affordable Care Act. I was chairman at the time. We spent years putting that together. 15 months to work on the first part, the white paper, which we issued 2 months after the 2008 election. We didn't care whether John McCain was elected president or Barack Obama. It was irrelevant, because we tried to do what we thought was best for the country. Now, it had warts. It wasn't perfect, but that's what we did. Now, there are 2 major provisions that I, as chairman, kept off the table. Someone on an earlier panel said something that's really important. When I was putting together the ACA, everything is on the table. Everything is on the table, because if somebody wants to take something off the table, someone else has the rationale, well, what about my problem? But 2 things I took off the table. One was single payer. Progressives, Democrats very much want a single payer system. I got a lot of warts and scars because I said, no, we can't do single payer. This country is not ready for a single payer. The second was negotiate a price of Medicare, drug companies and all that. If those 2 things alone, if we were a single payer country, and if we had more negotiated price between Medicare and the pharmaceuticals, that'd go a long, long, long way. Other countries do negotiate price, very much more than do we with the pharmaceuticals. Now, I'm not here saying we should have a single payer system, but I am saying that it's something that got to think about if we're going to be honest with ourselves to get real control over healthcare spending.
Well, I appreciate that because you're going deep into the policy and you're identifying both one of the driver of the healthcare spending, and you're talking about the mechanisms that can get us to a change, whether we like that particular policy or not, but you're talking about policy. I want to turn to David, and then I want to ask Jim just to respond to your last point on single payer and the mechanisms that we should be thinking about.
For any system to be successful and sustainable over time, you have to have 3 things. Properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing. Adequate transparency to provide reasonable assurance that they will, and in the healthcare, for example, cost and quality, all right? And thirdly, appropriate accountability if they don't.
I'm sorry, I got to jump in there. You need, to make it sustainable, you need political cooperation.
No, I agree with that too.
That's what
to
you
get it
really
done.
need for sustainability.
But the design is what I'm talking about, not, yeah, you got to have political feasibility, I agree, all right? Healthcare, we're 0 for 3. That's a strikeout. K through 12 education, we're 0 for 3. Political system, we're 0 for 3. Tax system, we're 0 for 3. No wonder we got a problem. Secondly, You can't just reform Medicare and Medicaid. You got to reform the whole healthcare system. And one of the things that we've never had a discussion about that we need to is how much universal health care is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. By the way, affordability is a two-way street, not just the individual, the country. How much can the country afford? And what most people will tell you, and I've done citizen education engagement in 47 states, DC, several territories, they'll tell you what's essential is preventative, wellness, and catastrophic. That should be universal, and that you should have options for more than that. That's affordable and sustainable. So the bottom line is, you know, we don't meet those three basic premises, which means the system isn't gonna work, all right? Last thing, 2003 is the year, I believe, and I remember meeting with you early in my tenure as Comptroller General. It was a very memorable meeting because we had surpluses. We paid down debt 2 years, okay? You know, the first 4 years I was Comptroller General, in large part due to the chairman here. But you know, 2003, three things happened that told me that things were out of control. Number one, second round of tax cuts that were supposed to pay for themselves, they didn't come close. Secondly, we invaded a sovereign nation without declaring a war for the purpose of turning over the government, trying to build a democracy. It cost thousands of lives, trillions of dollars, eliminated a check and balance on Iran, which we're now paying a price for. And thirdly, we expanded Medicare, rightly or wrongly, to add prescription drugs. It added $8 trillion in new unfunded obligations when Medicare was already underfunded $19 trillion. And when I left office in 2008, debt held by the public to GDP was 40%. Now it's 100, headed to 175 on optimistic assumptions within the next 30 years. Things are out of control. Let me come back to what I said. You've got to have a constitutional amendment. The debt ceiling is a bad joke. It hasn't worked. Statutory approaches have not stood the test of time, and they won't stand the test of time.
Jim, I want to come back to you. You've got a lot that you could respond to, either from the senator or from David, about the mechanisms of healthcare, drivers of healthcare, reform options. I want to just take the opportunity to read one thing. And Senator Baucus, this is something you said. This is not a gotcha. This is just something that you said that I liked. You said this in 2012. You said, just gives a little bit of context. You said, 40% of the long-term growth of federal health care programs is due to rising health care costs. 60% is due to Americans aging. In fact, each and every day, 10,000 Americans turn 65. As chairman of the Finance Committee, I can influence a lot of policies, but I can't keep people from getting older.
Wise man said that.
Wise man said that, indeed. You said, we need to focus on what we can influence, and then I think this is the key here, and Jim, maybe respond to this as well. You said what we can influence is overall healthcare costs. Shifting the cost to seniors is not the solution. We cannot break the promise to Medicare and Social Security. And so your perspective, as I read this, and maybe it's changed or maybe not, is we got to shrink the pie with respect to healthcare spending, not reallocate who's going to pay that cost, not shifting it on, cost shares onto seniors, but really we need to get the price of healthcare under control. I think that's what you're saying. And so it's an interesting policy perspective, right? And in one sense, it seems to me to be a more difficult thing to do. The easier thing might be just to shift the burden, but you're saying, no, we got to tackle the harder problem and shrink the overall cost of healthcare. And so you can jump in, you can interrupt Jim if you want, but I'm going to turn this to Jim and ask you just to sort of help us think about what kinds of tools we should be bringing to the table when we try to shrink the overall size of healthcare and address our fiscal challenge in that respect.
Well, in 2 minutes, we can all fix healthcare right here and now, right? I mean, so yeah, it's an awfully big topic. So this is one of the problems with our fiscal situation is inevitably as people circle around it and get into it, eventually, rightly, someone will say, you know what? A lot of this is a healthcare problem. And that's correct. But then when you get to, okay, and then what? Here's the issue. We have a big, diverse country. We're not comparable in a lot of ways to some other nationalized, smaller countries with less heterogeneity across the country and, a very big and diverse situation. So I think this sort of idea of we're going to have a very simplistic way of going about this without addressing the fact that we've already got an incumbent system isn't realistic. So we've got a hybrid public-private model that Chairman Baucus had a lot to do with influencing heavily over many years. It's a hybrid public-private model that operates kind of on incentives, kind of on regulation, very imperfectly. Unfortunately, a couple of the big things are tough to do, but you got to change one or two big things to kind of get some of the incentives moving in the right direction. On the employer side, Chairman Baucus included in the bill, to his great credit, the Cadillac tax, my single favorite provision in the entire Affordable Care Act. I was the only person in America that liked that provision. Kidding.
I'm sure you were.
And it quickly went away. All right, but the employer community is always saying, well, we would like to solve this on our own. It's a collective action problem. They will never solve it on their own. They remember, when they offer an employer plan, it's good news. They want to give something good to, they're trying to attract workers, right? So someone's going to have to say, here's a limit on how much you're allowed to do in that regard, okay? Otherwise, the tax preference really is very powerful. So you need a limit. The second thing you need to do is decide in Medicare whether some combination of incentives and regulation can be moving more people into capitated systems. Right now we have Medicare Advantage, but it's run in a certain way, poorly. It ought to be more competitive and clear who's charging more and who's charging less. And the third thing, and this is a very big topic, there's too many things to sort of say all at the same time, but the third thing is I disagree on one element, which is, yeah, we need to make the healthcare system more efficient. But we also need to realize that people can prepare for their own retirements if you give them time and an incentive to do so. Right now, we're spending $13,000 or so per senior through Medicare, okay? I think we could still do $13,000, maybe, but we can't do $20,000, which is where we're headed. So we ought to start saying to people, you're gonna have to pay more of the premium yourself. Okay, yes, it'll be organized, it'll be there for you, but some of the cost is going to have to be shifted onto middle class and upper middle class people to pay for it themselves. So they don't have this gigantic burden on the fiscal situation. Like I said at the top, we've become much wealthier as a country. We have a lot of wealth in this country. We can solve this if we organize and plan how we're going to extract money from the right people at the right time with some foresight and planning, okay? Part of it is premiums for their own Medicare. I don't think we should try to assume all of that's just going to be through efficiency and price controls and so on. They're going to have to pay more themselves.
Let me I had to deal with Medicaid. The Medicaid budget for states is the biggest and the most difficult thing to deal with. Our growth in Medicaid went from, numbers may be somewhat off, 10, 11% down to about 5%, and more people got covered. How you like that? And then I expanded Medicaid. So 600,000 people didn't have to spend their time in the emergency room, and they didn't have to sleep under a bridge or be in prison. Now, isn't that interesting? From 11% or 10%, I think it was about 11, down to about 6. And we covered more people. How's that possible? Because we sat down and figured out the best way to do it. And there was a lot of reforms we did. And some people didn't like the reforms. I mean, for example, I don't think these even stood the test of time. If you go in a nursing home, you ought to tell us what your quality is. We'll pay you more money if you do quality. I think they stripped that out because the nursing home industry owns the state of Ohio legislature fair and square. But the fact is that we were able to do it. I had a plan in 2000 to fix Social Security and would have fixed it for 50 years. How did I do that? Well, how did I? It wasn't me. I had smart people around me. I just put my name on it. How'd we do it? Well, we started people, when they got ready to get their Social Security, they started at a lower level because they didn't know where they were going to start anyway. And then secondly, we gave the young people access to the market, just like you have with thrift savings accounts. And when you put all that together, we were actually going to extend the program. How'd that program do? It did as well as Graham-Rudman did, which is just didn't do anything. There are ways to fix these things. So I don't want to be a pessimist here. But I don't believe the incentive is there. And I so much associate with what Senator Baca said about the quality of the people. When you had Bob Dole and Max Baucus and Sam Nunn, and you had people like that, the country was always first. I mean, we fought and all that stuff, but there was a time when it came down to what are we going to do for the country, and we did it, right, Senator? And that's sort of what we're missing today. Are these things fixable? Is it fixable to have an improved healthcare system? Let me ask you this. Why is it that if you go into a city, you see more cranes building hospitals than you have the birds themselves called cranes, right? all you see is more expansion. Do we need all? No, we don't. But there's no reason to stop it now. But so can you do quality? Do you have to go to the dentist and get a root canal to fix these things? No, you don't. It's the 21st century. We live with AI. There's many things we can do. But it's going to require people to say, okay, let's go do it, and let's do it for our children and our grandchildren. And I respect what he's saying about the statute. I just think without a balanced budget requirement, it isn't going to happen. I can tell you in my state, if we didn't have it, there is no way I could have had the legislature go along with the things that I needed to do. And by the way, when I came in, we were 20% in the hole. We had 90 cents in the rainy day fund. And when I left, we had $2 billion in our rainy day fund. You know what? Maybe I should have gotten elected when. I mean, that's a pretty good record. Anyway, there's reason to be optimistic. The last thing I want to say is, and this guy's been working like a dog on all these things. We have our challenges. But how would you like to live in China and be stuck in some prison somewhere because you're a preacher? Or how would you like to, how does anybody think that in a free market, free enterprise system, which is what this place I think is all about, Milton Friedman and all this other stuff, the free exchange of ideas can help us solve problems. And in these authoritarian places, you think outside the box, and they'll put you in the box for the rest of your life. So we got challenges, but we can fix them here. I don't think they can fix them there. Senator, you agree with that? I mean, you're a former ambassador to China. What do you?
I care about these international issues, but
I think the head of our panel would like us to stick to this subject.
It's not a complete conversation if we only talk about the spending side. I want to touch on the other side of the ledger, and I want to give a few minutes for a Q&A, and I want to end close to on time. And so I believe that we have a spending problem. Governor, you said that. I also believe that any practical solution is going to involve more revenues coming into the system. I think there's logical demographic reasons to justify that. It's a different country. It's an older, sicker country that we're looking at in the future than we came from in the past. And so there's likely going to be a need for new revenues. I don't want to ask you all to name your favorite loophole that you want to close, but I want to ask this question. And Senator, I'll start with you, and let's just go really quick so we can wrap up and get to the audience. What kinds of tax revenues should we be searching for? Should we be searching for direct tax revenues, meaning that actual voters are going to be paying more, or should we be trying to sneak around and look for taxes like corporate loophole closures where the voters aren't going to feel it as much? Is that strategically a better idea? And second of all, should we be thinking about revenues inside the current tax system, like broadening the income tax base, as Jim was suggesting, the Cadillac tax type thing, or should we be thinking about outside the current system, like a VAT, like they have in other countries?
Well, I'm a big fan of lowering the rates and broadening the base. We have way too many tax expenditures, way too many loopholes. And there's, you name it, there's some interest group that wants his special tax provision, his or her credit, tax credit. I mean, it's a mess, frankly. And we have, twice that I can recall, we worked at it and made some headway. Under President Reagan, that's what we did. We broadened the base, and we lowered rates. And it's kind of interesting, a slight digression here, but Dave Camp and I figured this is what we want to do. He was chairman of the House Ways and Means, and I was chairman of the Finance Committee. Republican, Democrat. He's a good guy. I like him a lot. Anyway, we thought we'd want to reform the code, he and I. We went around the country, different organizations, different forums, and so on and so forth. And pretty soon I realized this is going nowhere. And it's going nowhere for a couple of reasons. One, because there's no big public groundswell. It's kind of academic, no big public groundswell. And second, there's no presidential buy-in. My judgment is, in all of this stuff, it's critical to have presidential buy-in. One problem with the Simpson-Bowles is we didn't have it. You know, President Obama, executive order, created this thing, and then he kind of a little diffident about it. He didn't really get involved with it. Yeah, that really hurt. And there was no buy-in by the leadership at that time either, probably House and Senate. So that's kind of why Simpson-Bowles was kind of stillborn. But there's there are a lot of loopholes. I don't have a favorite one, but I would very much think that we need to keep our current system. I'm not wild about trying to VAT. That's a bridge too far right now. Okay. Maybe a carbon tax, because I do think we should tax carbon and give the money back to people who are discombobulated because of a carbon tax. But I'd stick with the current system.
Very good. All right. I'm going to defer the opportunity for others to answer that question because I do want to bring in the audience. There are individuals here who are holding microphones, and I think we have time for one or two if the questions are short and if the answers are short. Right here in the front row.
Thank you. Healthcare is maybe the biggest industry in the world. It's insanely complex and it constantly changes. It's hard for me to imagine that government policy can do a good job with that. The one word that I don't think I heard anyone say was competition. So is there not a transparent combination of government massively pushing transparency and opening up competition as a way to address this insanely complex system?
Yes. So I'm glad you asked that question. I really should have hit that earlier. So from my perspective, there's a lot of efficiency gains that are still laying there to be taken through incentives for people to identify and pick lower priced options. Now, a lot of people think that that's sort of a pie in the sky kind of thing, but actually when it's been tested, it actually does work. I mean, it's a strange thing. When they did surgeries through a major surgery experiment in California where they did a common definition of what they were buying, and then they told people, here's the median price, and if you want to go above that, you pay it yourself. Lo and behold, everybody stayed at the median price, okay? So it does work, but there's two elements that are critical. There has to be a common definition, so it's easy to do comparisons, okay? So the regulation comes in by saying everybody's got to price the same thing. And the second thing is everybody who picks the lower priced option needs to win. They need to be able to keep the money, okay? And the system is not set up to do that. So to do that, you got to make two changes that are big and hard, and people complain. But if you do it, the evidence shows it would work. Not for the entire system, but for about 40% of it. So I think, yes, you're right. We need to move in that direction.
Let me just briefly, transparency is very important. There was an article written by a fellow named Gawande, who looked at the healthcare systems in El Paso and McCollum, Texas. Guess what? In McCollum, the price of healthcare was twice what it was in El Paso. Doctors charged twice as much for the same procedure in McCollum, Texas, as they did in El Paso. Second, the outcomes in McCollum were worse than they were in El Paso. And you go all around the country, and different doctors in different communities charge different amount for the same procedure, basically depending upon the community, because that's what the community, basically goes for. So transparency is a big solution. Second, I think we need to look at how providers are reimbursed. Right now, it's essentially procedure-based. And if you do an appendectomy, whatever it is, you get paid according to the procedure. There's something called DRGs, and that can be gamed. Doctors tend to want to get the next DRG up because you get a few more bucks that way. We in the Affordable Care Act tried to address that by trying to move reimbursement away from number of procedures to quality. of character, outcomes. Now that's very hard to do. It's hard to measure outcomes. But I think it's important for us to try to move in that direction because that's going to help.
We've just got a minute or two left, so I'm sorry, we're out of time for questions. I just want to give the governor and David 30 seconds each just to kind of help close us out here. He's done. He said his say. David, you get 45 seconds.
Incentives, transparency, accountability, all right? Competition is good, all right? And one of the fundamental problems we have also in the political system is we don't have enough competition, real competition.
It's
All
got,
right.
if I might say, this is very ironic. Here we are talking about bending our U.S. Constitution for a balanced budget. And I was in the Senate working on all these health issues. It dawned on me, it's in the Constitution that every American thinks he or she is entitled to perfect health care. It's already in our Constitution, virtually. And that's a big driver here. People think they're entitled to nearly perfect health care, and everybody's taking advantage of that desire.
I want to thank my panelists, and I want to thank the audience. We have a short break here. I don't know how long. We'll be back in 5:25. Don't feel that you have to get out of your seats. You can stay in your seats, and we'll start the next one in just a few minutes.
These all go in circles, so that slows you down.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us this long. My name is Lauren Enns. I lead the national campaign for a balanced budget amendment. First and foremost, thank you to the American Enterprise Institute and Robert Doar for welcoming us in and hosting these extremely informative panels. This one will focus on a solution, the Balanced Budget Amendment campaign. We'll talk about the ins and outs of the constitutional amendment process, and then we'll talk about the forward progress that the Balanced Budget Amendment campaign has made up to this point. So first thing, let me introduce our panelists. I guess I'll just start at the end. I don't think this man needs any introduction, but Governor Ron DeSantis served in Congress for 3 terms, representing Florida's 6th congressional district, and has served as Florida's governor for the last 7.5 years. Your 22 re-election was like a record, right? It was 60-40, something like that, biggest in Florida
Something
history.
like that.
Yeah, go figure. And over the last 2 years, actually 3 years, Governor DeSantis has helped lead the Balanced Budget Amendment campaign. He's gone to a number of states for us, like Kentucky, Idaho, Montana, and has just really helped carry the flag, so we greatly appreciate that. Third on the panel is William Fruth. He is an economist who studies local economies and advises counties and cities on how to better run their economies and provides assessments such as that. He and I both published books in 2009, 2010 regarding this campaign, and were the ones that actually started the modern version. Some of you may know Ronald Reagan actually ran this campaign after he left the governorship of California, and actually ran it all the way up until the early 1980s. So this is more the modern manifestation of the same campaign. In the middle, we have Constantine Carrard. Constantine basically ramrodded our Arizona campaign back in 2016, 2017, helped put the Grand Canyon state on the map. He's been working on Article 5 campaigns ever since, so he has a lot of experience and expertise in this field. And then, of course, the fourth member of the panel, again, needing no introduction, Governor Chris Sununu, served as governor of New Hampshire from 2017 to 2025. Also served as our national honorary chair in 2025 and continues to serve on our board of directors. So again, this panel will be focusing on the actual Balanced Budget Amendment campaign. And I guess that brings the discussion to me. My name is Lauren Enns. I lead the national campaign for a Balanced Budget Amendment. Like I said, Bill and I started the campaign back in 2012, and I've been leading the campaign since about 2016, so about 10 years now. And we're getting close to the finish line. This is getting exciting. So hopefully by the end of this time, you guys will all have a really good idea about the amendment process and, of course, the campaign itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn to Governor DeSantis and just kind of let you kind of talk about why you felt compelled to get involved in this campaign back when, I think it was at the RGA when Governor Sununu talked about it.
Well, one, I mean, I think that for what we've done in Florida, we have credibility talking about these issues. And I understand a state is just different than the Leviathan we have here in D.C. But if you look since I became governor, if you take all the debt that's accumulated in Florida's history, 181 years, just since I've been governor, we've retired more than half of it. We did an accelerated debt repayment program. We retired bonds early. We did all that. If you look at the amount of money I've line item vetoed, the previous record was $800 million in a year. I did $3.5 billion in 1 year. I vetoed 3% of the budget that the legislature did 1 year. And so now we're in a situation where this budget that I'm going to sign within the next few weeks, after I do line item vetoes, it'll be the 4th straight year of spending reductions in the state of Florida. But at the same time, we're doing Everglades restoration, accelerated road projects, we're raising salaries for police and teachers, doing all this stuff. So it can be done. I mean, you can make choices, you can be fiscally responsible, and it has a very harmonious effect when you're doing it because we're lowering taxes and we still get this revenue coming in. So we've shown it can be done at the state level. This is a tougher problem up here. I'm convinced that you're never going to be able to solve it unless you have constitutional constraints on the ability of Congress to bankrupt the country. If it's just saying we're going to go elect good people and they're going to do good policy, first of all, that may work 1 or 2 years, but then the next Congress undoes it and things just don't end up working. So they have to have constraints and incentives to stop what we've seen happen, particularly over the last 10 years, where it's really gone. I mean, 2012, I remember I got elected to Congress. We were concerned about the debt going there. 3 terms I was over there, fully recovered from that experience, by the way. I've got no problems there, very clear thinking. But I would remember how hard it would be to actually win spending cut votes with a Republican House of Representatives. Almost never happened. Very rarely would happen where we'd actually win those votes. So you need to have there's going to be some people that get elected that want to do the right thing for the right reason. That is never going to be a majority. That's just not. So you have to be able to provide these constraints and just think, and Lauren and I have done things in different parts of the country, and so he knows the history. Many of you probably know we were very close to passing this in the 90s here, 1 vote away in the Senate. Probably would have been ratified at the time. That was when we were about to generate a surplus in the late 90s. Just imagine if this had passed and been enacted at the end of last century, the whole fiscal trajectory of the country would be so much better right now than it is. We're in a much deeper hole now, but I think if you don't have some constraint, then we're basically just acknowledging that we're going to end up having a major crisis on our hands, and we're close. We've got a lot of states that want to do this. They need a little bit of prodding sometimes, and the voters need to tell the state representatives that you need to do it. There's some misinformation out there just about the whole process of states certifying it, which, some of these very conservative people are like, oh, you can't do the states. I'm like, well, wait a minute. What kind of a view is that? Well, of course the state should be leading on something like this. So there's momentum for it. I think every day we look and see they're not solving the problems, and I don't think ultimately it'll be solved unless we have a constitutional change where these incentives are effectively, on some level, imposed on the members of Congress.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis. A second question real quick. This is getting into the process, so how the Constitution is actually amended. So of course, an amendment has to be proposed and then ratified. So could you talk about the 2 different methods for proposing amendments before they go to the states for ratification?
So think about the Founding Fathers. They got so many things right. They would think about different scenarios, and they understood you needed to be able to amend a constitution. You're binding future generations. There's going to be times when circumstances change, and you're going to have to change the fundamental law. So how did they say? Well, you can propose through 2/3 of each House of Congress can propose. Congress tomorrow could propose something. Still isn't part of the Constitution. Until you get ratification by 3/4 of the states, it is not part of the Constitution. So Congress has an ability to propose. So too that the states have an ability to propose under Article 5. So what we're doing is just getting the states, a threshold of states where you can propose a balanced budget amendment. And then the states would still have to ratify by 3/4 of the states, just like they would do if Congress were to propose. So there's some misinformation that says if the states are trying to do this, they're going to end up leading to a new constitution, change the constitution. States do not have power through Article 5 to actually change. They can propose just like Congress can propose. Once something's proposed, the ratification process is exactly the same as if Congress proposed it vis-a-vis the states. But if you think about it, how else are you going to propose a constitutional amendment to address the failings of Congress if you can't do it through the states? They knew that sometimes Congress would be the problem. That's why they wanted to do it. But ultimately, it's a very significant threshold for ratification. And I mean, Lauren runs these numbers, getting us to 32, 33, 34 to kind of trigger, and maybe Congress will see the light and just go kind of write an amendment. It would be a real serious fight to get this thing ratified. I think you get 25, 30 maybe pretty quickly, but then you're going to have to go into maybe a little bit more treacherous waters to do. But that's the way the founders understood what they were doing. It's a very difficult process, but it's something that I think is appropriate for the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Governor. And so, of course, as we're talking about the process, so 2/3 of the Congress, 2/3 of the state have to pass convention calls, and then, of course, the convention is convened. And so when the convention is convened, it's essentially the same as a meeting of Congress. They can propose an amendment out of the convention, and of course, Congress can propose an amendment anytime. So it just gives the states co-equal power to be able to draft an amendment and then propose it and make it available for the states to debate during the ratification process. And that's kind of what I want to come to with Governor Sununu. Although first, kind of the same question I gave Governor DeSantis. What was it that kind of got you interested in this?
Well, as the governor pointed out, first, this can be done. And not just the concept of ratifying the Constitution, but you can balance budgets. And why do I say what is pretty obvious to folks in this room? Because for the most part, all the states do it in some form. But literally, you go up to the other end of the street here on Capitol Hill, and they act like it's impossible. Well, it just can't be done. It's one of the main reasons I did not run for the U.S. Senate is because I went to my fiscally conservative senator friends that were sitting here that said, "Oh, you should run for the Senate." I said, "Yeah, but this is a really important issue. It's more important than health care. It's more important than Social Security. It's more important than every other issue we deal with, because without it, none of that matters." And so the incredibly frustrating process was, oh, wow, even when we're talking, even when DOGE was happening here, right? And you had the president talking about balanced budgets. And there was even the conservatives were really starting to get behind this idea of more austerity and not limiting government, maybe sending more power back to the states. Even that fell apart, and it couldn't get momentum here. And I realized, boy, even in those times when we had the opportunity to do it, and as the governor said, we elect our representatives, our fiscally conservative. I'm not even saying Republican or Democrat. I'm just saying folks that understand how important this is. They talk one thing, they come to this town, and they have a completely different mindset. This is a path, and as far as I can tell, it's the only path to actually force the guardrails and get these men and women on Capitol Hill to live by the rules that everybody else has to live by. Every other public organization in the country has to live within some type of balanced budget formality, with the exception of U.S. Congress. It's crazy. So it's real. It's coming. It has come that it isn't politics. It's just math. And again, I believe in a lot of the spending programs that are out there. I believe making sure that we have strong mental health programs for kids and strong Social Security programs here and all of that. That all completely comes to a crash. I say it to my friends on the left all the time. They say, well, if you balance budget, everything's going to get slashed. Believe me, if we do nothing, the cliff comes, because it is there. It's just math. You hit hyperinflation, and all that will survive is probably Medicare and Social Security. Every other project and program that you like comes to a screeching halt. If we do it now, we can give ourselves an off-ramp. We still have a little time to keep some of these programs, bring some austerity to it, find efficiencies, get rid of the waste and fraud, but it's only truly going to happen unless we, the people, use the power that the Founding Fathers gave us. As we say in New England, the Founding Fathers were wicked smart. As the governor pointed out, they really were. They really thought this stuff through and gave a real opportunity to make changes with a full system of checks and balances at the same time. So it's there. It can be done. But again, it has to be, and that's the amazing opportunity that Robert and AEI and folks here are, and the opportunity we have today is to bring this conversation to a next level. I've talked about this on CNBC and Bloomberg, and with all due respect to those of my great friends in the media, they step right over it. That's like a non-issue. This is the issue. It just doesn't get the headlines today because it's in Washington, unless the car crash has already happened, people aren't looking at it. We have an opportunity to prevent the car crash.
Well, thank you, Governor. To get back into the process of it, so we've talked about the proposal. Governor, if you could describe the two different methods that Congress has. So when an amendment is proposed by Congress, it also selects what's known as the mode of ratification. When a convention, if it were ever called, proposes an amendment, it actually goes back to Congress, where Congress then selects the mode of ratification. So, Governor, could you talk about the two different modes that Congress can select?
No, I'm going to get it wrong. I'm totally serious. I will not get that right. I would go, seriously, I would ask you or I'd ask Governor DeSantis as the constitutional scholars. I know there are multiple modes and you can do it, but no, I'm going to get that question wrong.
All right, well, I will jump in and take the baton. You didn't get the email?
Answer the question, Lauren.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a governor. I get stuff done. If you're asking me, the House or Wise of Congress, that I get frustrated at page 1.
So if you read Article 5, there's 2 methods that Congress can select. They can select the state legislatures, which they have for 26 of 27 amendments to the Constitution. But they also wanted an alternate method, and that would be special ratification conventions held in each state capital. If you all remember, that's how our founders selected the US Constitution to be ratified. It wasn't the state legislatures at the time. It was special ratification conventions they held in each state capital so that the best and the brightest of our founders could show up, like Madison and Hamilton. So the Congress does actually have that. And the only time in American history that the Congress has selected the other mode of ratification, these special ratification conventions, was to repeal prohibition. Because the ratification convention, essentially the way it works, and each state has different rules on how they select the delegates to that convention in the state capital, but essentially the people running, let's say, I live in Florida, I think we do it per county in Florida. Clearly we haven't done this in 90 years since the repeal of prohibition, but you would elect 1 delegate per county. And this would be the most simple election in American history. It's like, I'm gonna vote yes or I'm gonna vote no. And then the people of that county or district or whatever would vote for that delegate, or if there's 2 running against each other, they vote for the person who's said they're gonna vote the way that person wants them to vote. So essentially, it's an indirect popular vote is what that comes down to. And so that's the second option that Congress has for the mode of ratification, but it's only select that time, I think that, just for the repeal of prohibition. Okay, moving on to...
See, he was much better when Lauren answering that question.
Well, well, no, we don't have time for this story. I'll skip that one. My third question goes to Constantine. Over the course of American history, the push to call a convention has been used to spur action by Congress, thus creating a third option for proposing amendments. Please describe this option, which has become known as preemption.
Oh, sure. So we have 27 amendments, and Congress has proposed all 27 of them. But Congress didn't like all 27 of them. So why'd they propose them? And essentially what that comes down to is state pressure, which is kind of what we're here for today. Some of this is great, like the Bill of Rights was state pressure early on because some states wanted things that were supposed to be done right after we ratified the Constitution, and Congress was dragging its feet, and so you had state pressure basically saying, hey, you promised us we're supposed to have these things. And Hamilton was warning about the fact that the states don't need Congress to propose these things, they can do it themselves. Madison kind of heard the states, compiled sort of the 12 more popular ideas. Congress proposes the 12, the states ratify 10, that's your Bill of Rights. Probably the best example is the 17th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators. Obviously, the United States Senate had no reason to vote to change the method by which they all got to be United States senators. Like, it cuts directly against their self-interest, which is what you see on an issue like the balanced budget. And yet, 2/3 of each body of Congress proposed the 17th Amendment. But they didn't do it until states had passed so many calls. Back then, there were fewer states. You needed 32 states, and the states could draft it themselves. And they waited until 31 states had passed calls for the direct election of senators before Congress bent the knee and said, okay, we didn't realize you were so serious about it. All right, here you go. Here's your 17th Amendment. So preemption basically is what has worked for as long as you've had this Constitution. It is the states telling Congress, listen, if you don't do this, we will. It is the reason Article 5 was, the original proposition for Article 5 was Congress proposes and the states ratify. And before the founders left the convention, they said, yeah, but what if Congress is the problem? Congress wouldn't propose the solution. And so you see that specifically in a case like spending, the states will insist and Congress will bend the knee, but they won't bend the knee until you get right up until that number. They're gonna drag it out. I mean, listen, every year you wait, they gotta spend, what, $2 trillion more than they bring in? Like, there's a lot of incentive to keep things going. So preemption basically is what has worked throughout history. It is how you force Congress to act. It is the states acting together to say, if you don't do this, we will. We don't need you. And when you get close, Congress bends the knee. They always bend the knee.
Yep, thank you. And this was a strategy that was promoted by Ronald Reagan. He believed strongly in it. Again, like I said, he led this campaign to 32 states of the 34 required to call a convention by 1983. And his MO was to get to 33 and then pivot to Congress and use that as leverage to get Congress to do it. Because I think Congress's greatest incentive is to control the drafting of the amendment language. They do not want to give that up to a convention, because then in essence it would be state legislators who would go as delegates to the convention. And for a balanced budget amendment, they would be drafting the fiscal rules Congress will have to budget by forever. And I highly doubt Congress is going to let that happen. So when we get to 33 states, we pivot to Congress, and we use that leverage to get Congress to propose a good bipartisan amendment, and then it goes to the states for ratification. A convention is just something that you don't ever need. Historically, we've never had the need for one, because again, every time you get close, Congress will step in and propose the amendment. Okay, thank you, Constantine. I'm going to turn to my fourth question, and that'll go to Bill. Bill, can you tell us how many states have applied for a convention to propose a balanced budget amendment, and a little bit about the history of the modern campaign, which you and I helped start about 12, 13 years ago?
I'd be happy to, Lauren.
Thank you.
Quick history, and Lauren alluded to this. In the late 1970s, there was an effort for a convention of the states to propose a balanced budget amendment. Ironically, it was being led by Democrats. Maryland was the first state to pass this. That then grew as states began. Delaware passed it. It grew, and then President Reagan endorsed it. And unfortunately, at that point, it kind of became political. Oh, Reagan wants it, we're against it. But they were able to get to 32 states. Consequently, when Governor Kasich and Newt Gingrich took office, they pledged that they would propose a balanced budget amendment. In 1995, the vote in the House was 2/3 and was over to the Senate. And unfortunately, there, we fell one vote short. But during that period of time, the effort for a convention of states to propose a balanced budget amendment dissipated. The interest wasn't there because Congress was going to do it. Now, we have two groups that are opposed to having this convention, the ultra-right and the ultra-left. Now, a lot of people think the political system is a horizontal line, but it's more like a horseshoe. They both oppose it, but for different reasons. The ultra-right opposes it because they believe the myth that the convention will run away and propose any amendment it wants and change the Constitution, do all sorts of nefarious things. And the ultra-left opposes it because they're afraid the state legislatures will discover this power. And so over time, they were able to get several states to repeal their previously approved issues and resolutions that they passed. So we begin in roughly 2010 instead of 2012 with basically 11 states that did not repeal and or rescind in the future. And guess what? In 2010, the state of Florida was the first one in the new effort to pass it. And for some reason, Governor, you've passed it 2 more times. You loved it so much. Then came Alabama, and then in 2012, the state of New Hampshire passed it. Now, Governor, I'm a little confused. I live in South Florida, and on our television, we have these advertisements for enrolling in the University of Southern New Hampshire. I never thought the state was big enough to have a Southern. But then we progressed. Now, Lauren told the story. Basically, this effort was a handful of individuals working out of our home offices on our own nickel. We got 16 state legislatures to pass by 2018, and Lauren got South Carolina to pass this year. So we're at 28 states, 6 short of having a convention. And frankly, you know, and we lose these states like 1 vote, 2 votes, 3 votes. We could be at 32, 33 right now. If we just had, I could tell you the 6 people in 6 different states who caused us to lose those other 6 states. And it's unfortunate how close it was, but we've never had the resources to be able to finish the job, but I think right now we're going to be able to do that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bill. The next question will go back to Governor DeSantis. This is an interesting one. What does the $1.8 trillion budget deficit, which passed despite intense opposition from the GOP's biggest donor, Elon Musk, Tell us about Congress and the likelihood that it will ever rein in the debt without constitutional intervention by the states.
Well, I think, we can look back over the last year and a half and just acknowledge Elon and Doge fought the swamp, and the swamp won. Not even close. And he came in, and people criticize how some of the stuff was done, and maybe there was, but the idea was we were really going to do something about how government's spending money, and there was something on one of these prediction markets where there was just, I think, a guy that had been involved in policy in Washington, and you could have done a bet at the beginning of 25, will Congress reduce spending by 1 penny on net year over year? And if you had said no, you would have made a lot of money because they didn't do it even by 1 penny. So I think that process was a big issue kind of in the campaign. It was a huge source of news. There was intense interest. I can tell you, base voter Republicans back home, they were fired up. I mean, they thought it was really, really something, and it just didn't happen. You end up with omnibus, continuing resolutions. You end up with just more of the same. And I think the reason why, one of the reasons why is because there's no constraints on them doing more of the same. Their incentives are just to kick the can down the road. That's how somebody who's in the Congress ultimately is going to think and see about these things. It's less of a pain for them to do status quo and just try to get to the next election than it is to actually exercise some leadership. Yeah, you know what? You gotta, when you're leading, you take some risks. I could tell you the best things I've done as governor were at the time very unpopular. Certainly during COVID, we were leading on that totally against the overall zeitgeist. Now everyone looks back, oh yeah, well, I was with the governor. Oh yeah, of course, we were so glad you did. No, I was getting attacked a lot, which is fine. That's just what you have to do. But that, if you're always just trying to do the path of least resistance, you get more and more of this. So to me, if the Doge had come in and they had really upended Washington and changed the trajectory, that would probably have taken some of the wind out of the sails of this effort, because you're like, no, all it takes is some brains and some. But I think what that shows you is if you believe in ever getting a handle on this spending problem, we got to do something bigger than that. And I think this is the best vehicle that has a chance of actually coming to fruition that would actually make, I think, a generational difference in the trajectory of this country's finances.
Thank you, Governor. I'm going to come back to Governor Sununu, and this really goes to the politics of it. I mean, who would...
I can answer that one.
Okay.
Congressional process.
Who would control the proposal and ratification? We all know Republicans have more state legislatures, 28, I think. Democrats have 18. There's 4 split. But if you look at that, I mean, and the dynamics of it, we've got 3 voting thresholds to get to 33 states, then 2/3 in Congress, and then 38 states, 2/3 in Congress to propose, and then 3/4 of the states, or 38, to ratify. How is it that that's going to play out, Democrat versus Republican?
Sure. It isn't Democrat versus Republican. I think that's the thing people have to realize. I know, we talk about Ronald Reagan and doing this. Governor Jerry Brown was a huge believer in balanced budgets and a balanced budget process. This started for many folks as a Democrat idea, because it was about preserving. I go back to that. They don't want the system to completely fall apart. And it's not just our system. If America falls off the cliff financially, the whole world does. And they understood that. And so to preserve programs, to preserve a lot of this opportunity, to make sure it was there, a lot of Democrats got on board. And unfortunately, it did get political for kind of the wrong reasons. But to your point, Lauren, there are 2 or 3 stages of really valuable checks and balances in here. It forces the discussion to happen across the aisle, and it forces the argument, I think, to be raised. It isn't just about we're cutting costs and cutting. No, that's not about it at all. In fact, the organization, the Balanced Budget Amendment organization, isn't about this is exactly how you should do it. Ultimately, Congress will figure that out, right? They have to. It's about forcing Congress to figure that out, right? To force them to have the discussion that to date they know they should be having. They'll all tell you one-on-one how important fiscal responsibility is. But as was pointed out earlier, think about all the money that gets poured into these campaigns to get somebody to really make sure they're managing our look, let's call it really what it is. 535 individuals on Capitol Hill. What are they? They are actually the worst qualified money managers we've ever hired in the world. Right? That's all they're doing. They're just
Except when it comes to their own stock portfolios.
Yeah,
let's just
then
be clear about
right?
They may
Funny how
have a little help with that, but let's just be
funny
clear.
how that works, right? But they really are. They're managing our money. They have no money. The government has no money. They just manage your money. And that was time that you took away from your family, blood, sweat, and tears, and then you hand it over to those guys and say, please, I pray that you manage it well. And it's a disaster. A disaster. Any other business, as we know, would be out. So what does that mean? That means we all have the responsibility of getting this over the line. We all have the responsibility to preserve programs and process to make sure that it is a two-sided approach, right? It isn't the politicalization that a lot of folks have thrown on it. And that's why, yes, it will require reaching across the aisle on both sides to find that compromise. But let's finally force them to have a compromise. And by the way, when you do this, think of the opportunities that come the next day. Because now they've been forced to compromise. They've been forced to find common ground on such a big issue to preserve a lot of what we cherish and what is needed. As you know, and we can differ on what those needs are, but they're going to have to find a common ground. And I think that it sparks all this other opportunity out there. So again, it's a system with checks and balances. It's a system that demands that both sides are engaging, and it's a system that ultimately we control. Right? The democracy, the ratification process, the citizens truly have the say. And if you poll this across the country, what is it, over 80% of the country says, absolutely, we need to be smart and balance budgets. That's crazy. Of course we have to do that. And Congress just closes their eyes and ears and says, we're not listening, we're not listening. We're going to force them to listen, force them to take action, and that's a good thing. That's really, I think, a really positive thing for the overall process. Congress has they are a third leg in a really important stool of civic checks and balances that by their own doing has made themselves as irrelevant as they've ever been. And that's not a good thing. You want Congress and the legislative process to be strong. We want them to do better for their own selves, to have more importance. So, we can rely on them for moving the ball forward. And without that third leg of the stool, the system gets fundamentally weaker. So I think it is an opportunity to force them to do better by their own good.
Thank you, Governor. And just something to kind of bring it home that this will have to be a bipartisan process. There's no way Republicans can do it on their own, even though they have more states. If you want to get to 33 states to force action by Congress, threaten the convention, Republicans can get you close to 30 states, and then the final 2 or 3 are going to have to be Democrat. So Democrats have a check on that, and if they're not comfortable with it, it's not going to happen. You get into Congress. Republicans maybe can get you a simple majority in the Congress. It's going to take Democrats to get to that 2/3. So Democrats have a check on the proposal in Congress. And then you get out to ratification. Republicans, again, can get you close to 30 states. Democrats will control the final 8 to 10 state votes for a balanced budget amendment to be ratified. So that means we're going to have to get a bipartisan coalition of groups and organizations together from across the political spectrum to draft an amendment that everybody will be comfortable with. And so when we're talking about Republicans came in, kind of took over the issue with Reagan and Gingrich, and Democrats, kind of moved back a little bit, even though this was their campaign to start with. We need to bring Democrats back in and remind them, look, you have a check at every single one of those points, and if you don't like what's going on, it'll never happen. Okay, I'm going to come back to Constantine for my 7th question, and that kind of dovetails into what I wanted to ask you about. Which party can take credit for suggesting that a balanced budget amendment be added to the U.S. Constitution, and not only that, take credit for actually launching the state-led campaign for a balanced budget amendment?
Well, you've actually given some of that history already when you're talking about Maryland. But if I really want to cheat, I go to Thomas Jefferson, which will predate any existence of the Republican Party. He was the original Democrat, and he warned that the Constitution needed a limit on borrowing and appropriation because he was concerned about this quite some time ago. So in terms of the vision thing, we're going to give the award to Thomas Jefferson. So you can give the original Democrat the original credit for the idea, Yeah, 1975, it was the Maryland Senate President Clark who kind of picked up the mantle because he was concerned. And when we got to 32 states, 20 of those states were Democrat states, 12 were Republican states. And at the time, the debt that he was so freaked out about was $533 billion in 1975. So about 70 times bigger today than it is then. So if it was a problem then, it's probably a problem now. And just in line with what you were saying about Doge and Musk, in terms of the size of the problem, keep in mind that had Musk been wildly successful, and they had cut $1 billion a day like they had wanted to, and they did that every day for the whole year, and they weren't obstructed, they still would have cut about 1/5 of what they needed to cut to get rid of the actual deficit for the year. So it wasn't like we were asking them to solve the whole problem and they couldn't. They were taking a bite of the problem and still came up short.
But can I throw something else in there? But and again, that's 100% correct. But what I do kind of caution folks, we're not saying, boy, we have to go out and cut $2 trillion of programs. There's a growth model in there as well, right? You don't, and you can ramp it down. So folks that say, oh my God, you're going to cut $2 trillion out of the $7 trillion, but no, that's not the way it works. You do have to make some cuts. You can look at other revenues. There's a lot of other opportunities there. You're going to look at growth, going to make sure you have economic growth coming in. You can look at trade deficit. There's a lot of pieces to the pie to be considered. And frankly, that's one of the reasons we're sitting at a place like AEI, right? Because these guys are wicked smart too. And you need kind of that brain trust in those folks that really understand when you get to the nuts and bolts of how this is going to be done, all the different opportunities that are there. It isn't just, you got to find $2 trillion to cut and then come talk to us and it'll all work out. There's actually growth in there. So it isn't a huge slashing. If we do nothing, it will be slashing $2 trillion basically in a day, massive, or printing money, which is what we'll do, massive hyperinflation. I mean, we'll be wishing for the inflation we saw in 2021, 2022 when this car crash happens. It's going to be that bad. And what is inflation? It's the worst tax on low-income families and the poor you can have. So it isn't just a slash and burn. No, absolutely not. Lots of ways to get there. And that's kind of the exciting opportunity we still have.
The expression I heard, I don't know if you like it or not, was that you can choose between a crash landing or a controlled landing. And that's basically if you do nothing and you hit that wall, it's all at once.
Yeah.
You know.
And when we go around the country talking to state legislators, because it came down from on high, I mean, again, this was originally a Democrat initiative. 20 of the original 32 states were Democrat-controlled legislatures. But then, when Reagan made it his issue, and then Newt Gingrich added it to the contract with America, Democrats started to kind of turn against it just politically, not conceptually. But that trickled down to the state legislatures. So in many cases, we run into Democrats who just kind of reflexively say, oh, no, I don't know about that. What we need to do is bring it back and remind Democrats this was your initiative, and this is not political. I mean, bankruptcy or whatever you want to call it, hyperinflation, whatever ends up happening, that's going to play no favorites. It won't matter what letter is next to your name, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. This is going to affect everyone and every constituency, so it has to be addressed. And we have to bring this back and remind Democrats this was theirs to begin with. That's the only way we get over the hump and we get to 33, 2/3 in Congress, and then 38 for ratification. Okay, I'm going to come back to Governor DeSantis. And just a pretty simple question. What will a balanced budget amendment look like?
Well, I know Lauren's been working on it. When you do the call, it's not like we've done a call in Florida. Here's what the amendment has to be. I mean, this stuff will be negotiated. Obviously, if Congress, gets the baton, they're going to have to do something. And I think like people like us who are part of this, like if they do something that's a fig leaf, we're going to blow the whistle, right, and kind of continue. So if they want to be able to do it, it's got to be something that's meaningful. Look, what I do is different from maybe what could get ratified, right? I mean, I would absolutely say the spending can't go up. I would limit the spending, limit the debt, limit the tax. I would do all of that. How much you would be able to do and get 2/3 and then get 3/4. But if you at least put a restraint on the borrowing and spending and not gave 100 different loopholes where they could just make it a fig leaf, to me, that would be a huge, huge sea change. I look at like the states. I mean, we have it. I mean, pretty much every state has a balanced budget requirement. And what that does is, so like I mentioned, we were reducing spending, we've cut debt. So we've gone way beyond just having a balanced budget requirement in Florida because, that's kind of what we want to do. And then we were trying to push. But if you're not cut out like that, the balanced budget requirement gives the legislature, these people come in, they ask for programs. I want money for here. You don't want to say no. Like when I veto bills out of the budget, that's a concrete constituency that's going to be mad at me. The overall people, I'm doing good by the taxpayer, but that's a little more diffuse. Every time you excise money, this group here, this, that, all these others, then the legislators, when they come in, well, yeah, we don't have enough money this year. No, we got to balance the budget. We got to do it. So it just gives them an ability to just say, I love what you're doing. I'm for you. I want to do it, but we can't do it because we got to balance the books. Right now, no one even thinks it's a credit card. And I'll tell you, even like when you guys started in 2012, during that time, I guess Obama was president, he proposed the debt commission, the Simpson Bowles. Like both sides had to at least give lip service, like, hey, we got to get a handle on this. And I think maybe when it was COVID and just those massive spending over those 2-3 years, now no one even really talks about it in the Congress, I think in a really meaningful way. They just don't feel like they have to be proposing these things. So I think it'll obviously be written. The call does not commit any state to a particular product. That will be worked on. I would want it to be as strong as possible. Florida, we don't have an income tax, which, we could get into that convention. That'd be great. But we don't. But we do have limitations in our Constitution on the legislature raising taxes. Now we haven't done that since I've been governor, but it requires 2/3 of the legislature to raise taxes or fees in Florida, which I think is a good thing. I would love to get that as part of this, and we may not be able to do it, right? I mean, but it's just got to be something that is actually going to change the trajectory in practice. This is not just to be able to issue press releases, do a celebration, fundraise off of it and say we did something that has no impact. I think if Congress were to propose that, I think we'd all just say, no dice, we'll continue working through the states. So I want it to be as fiscally strong as possible. But I also understand these things are tough. And part of you guys kind of alluded to some of this. There were Democrats pushing this. This was a huge thing. And really up until the last maybe 10 years, both parties at least claim they were trying to do this. It's kind of fallen out of favor really on both sides in many respects. But there's a lot, but we're so divided politically as a country that, we got to just stress this is really not about left, right, Republican, Democrat. If we end up having a big debt crisis, Katie barred the door. But one of the things I think we fight is because we've racked up so much debt and haven't had, now we are having bad inflation problems because of this spending. That's just the truth. But we haven't had a massive crisis that I think if you guys started in 2012 and someone said, it's going to be 40 trillion, in 14 years, you guys, I think all of us would have said, oh man, there's no way, right? So every time they can get away with it, people then just feel like, oh, well, what does it really matter? And it is going to matter at some point. I can't tell you when. I can't tell you if it's tomorrow, next month, but it is going to matter. So let's do something. And Chris, finally, Chris has made also the point. The proposal is likely going to be, okay, we're $2 trillion in the hole annually. Here's a time period to get down to zero, and it's not going to require you to do it all at once. Which should, give some people peace of mind that this is something that, you got to get a glide path to, but it needs to be an enforceable glide path, and it needs to be a glide path that's definitely going to deliver us where we're trying to go.
Yep. And just to bring it back, because we get this question all the time when we're campaigning in the states, they'll say, well, what will be in the amendment? What will it look like? Well, if you look at the constitutional amendment process, we're not there yet. If we were to go to a convention, which we most likely won't, they have the power to draft the amendment. Or if we get to 33 and we pressure Congress to do it, they will draft the amendment. So of course, you can't really pre-draft it. Those are deliberative legislative bodies who have to be free to draft what they see fit. So it will be groups like, organizations like AEI, the Brookings Institute, Maya McGinnis's organization, Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, who have the brain trust, who have the plans that they have developed for how to actually get to a balanced budget. They'll be the ones on the Hill testifying and advising and saying, here's how we've gamed this out. I don't know if there's ever been war games done. I think that, you know, there's been a couple of times where organizations have gotten together and say, okay, if we had to balance the budget today, how would we do it and over what period of time? So it will be organizations in the private sector that have the expertise and that have done the research who will be going to the Hill and advising them on how to actually get to a balanced budget. Now, if you're talking about the basic provisions, of course, there'll be a basic balancing mechanism. There will be an exemption for natural disasters, emergencies, or wars. You know, that would be like a supermajority vote and then reapproval every 12 months. So that Congress can't just declare a never-ending war or emergency. And, you know, there could be something like a line item veto. Those would be the bigger provisions. But the real detail gets into what, again, Maya McGinnis is so expert at, and that is how you granularly actually reform programs and budgets to get to a balance over that reasonable amount of time.
Line item veto, though, did you have it in New Hampshire? Oh, man. So... So think about just with how things in Washington. They have like staffers meet, they write a 2,500-page omnibus bill, people vote on it without reading it, they dump it on the president's desk, and the president has a choice. Sign it and accept a lot of crap, or veto it and, quote, shut down the government. Well, imagine if you had the line item veto power. You'd be able to pare that back. And really do. So it would be, you know, Congress probably wouldn't like that, although they did pass it in the 90s statutorily. But I could tell you as governor, I mentioned us reducing Florida's debt by 50%, paying down. The amount we use to pay that down is almost the exact same amount of money I have line item vetoed since I've been governor. I mean, it almost tracks perfectly for it. So I would absolutely love to see a line item veto be a part of that. I think would be good. You know, it also helps just dealing with like members of Congress. Like it helps me with the legislature because, you know, they have things they care about in the budget. Well, you know, you have things as the executive you care about too legislatively. So you work together or you don't, right? So I think from an executive perspective, I think it'd be an absolute home run. Clearly, the way Washington does business with the omnibus has been a total disaster, and it would absolutely help with fiscal responsibility and discipline.
Well, thank you, Governor. I think I'm going to throw this back to Bill. How are we on time? Are we getting close?
We have time for Bill.
Okay. Bill, what would you say after all these years? You know, we were working in the trenches out in those states. What would you say was the most common thing that inspired legislators that we talked about that really got the public and even their representatives in the state legislatures engaged? I mean, if we have to appeal to people's imaginations, is it, you know, Social Security? I mean, this is, you know, Medicare, 3-4 years, you're going to have across the board cuts, Social Security 5-6 years. When we were campaigning, what was it that was most motivational to legislators when we were talking to them about this?
I think it's the same motivation that exists today and the reason why we will probably be successful. Fear. Fear of the future. I was in Corpus Christi in 2005 doing a community meeting on their economy. That's what I do. And a lady jumps up, older woman, and says, "You're talking about Corpus Christi's future economy, but our nation won't have one if Congress doesn't stop borrowing money and my grandchildren have to pay for it." This is 2005. And the deficit at that time, maybe 4 or 5 trillion. Jump ahead 20 years, 25 years. Her grandchildren are in the workforce today, and 20 cents out of every $25, 20 to 25 cents of every dollar they pay in taxes goes to interest on the national debt, and they're going to be suffered with this for the rest of their life. And they're going to have to pay back the $2 trillion that has been borrowed from Social Security. They're going to have to pay back the $1 trillion that's been borrowed from the federal retirement program, to pay back the $1 trillion that's been borrowed from the military pension program, all on the backs of that generation for the next 40 years. And it's unconscionable. And so when the legislatures understand this, and when the people understand this fear and it's anger it's translated to, and those people communicated to the legislators this fear, that's when we got votes. Now, Governor, you may not remember, but in 2010, we put on our general election ballot the straw question, should the Constitution be amended to require a balanced budget? Millions of people voted. This is a general election. Millions of people voted on this in Florida. 72% said yes. I checked every county. It passed by wide margins in every county in Florida, and the debt at that time was $14 trillion. And so, as I talk to people out, different around the country, they are angry and fearful of the national debt, but they feel impotent. They don't think they can do anything about it. They hear, people run for Congress, we're going to balance the budget, we're going to cut spending, but for 30 years, none of them have ever done it. And I explained to them, guess what? Your state legislator, not the representative to Congress that has a district of 700,000 people, your legislator who lives down the block has the power to stop this from happening. Then they get on the telephone. Yep. And this is why we will be successful, whether Congress passes it or not. I think it'll be ratified within 3 years. One election cycle. Those legislators that don't vote for it are going to be voted out of office, and people voted in. Quick ratification. The fear of the future is very powerful among these people right now. And we just have to figure out a way to have the resources, and we can get the states we're going to need. And if Congress wants to intercept us along the way, fine. Because our goal is to stop this spending and the borrowing. And if the Congress proposes a quality amendment, it'll be ratified rapidly. But if they don't, we're going to get our 34. And we get to 34, all of a sudden we're going to get 35 and 36, because other states are going to want to say, hey, we're on board too, because they want to be part of the convention.
Well, thank you, Bill. I think we're about at the point where we want to open it up for questions from the audience. So I'll take.
So I was on the Hill when we balanced the budget with Clinton and Newt, and Casey did a great job. I was also at the U.S. Chamber when we tried to lead a coalition to balance the budget. And the bottom line is, when it comes to raising big money from the business community or AARP, the coffers aren't there. And my question is you would think with the parade of horribles, of which we all know and you went through them, why aren't the big money entities putting money into a campaign like this? And I'm talking big monies you could spend on the elections. We have the messaging, AEI and Maya, all the data is there. That's not the problem. The problem is getting people to listen to it and putting pressure on members of Congress through election campaigns. It's similar to comprehensive immigration reform, which we never got done. But this is easier, and it should be easier. But why aren't the groups out there, the big money groups, pouring money into this kind of effort? Because the parade of horribles, as you all know, is coming at us. I mean, where's AARP? Where's the business community? It's crazy.
I can answer that question. Well, I think we can give two answers to that question. The first is that we've been flying under the radar, piling up states. And this is the first time that we're kind of rearing our head up to bring this back. We're approaching 30. We know that we're going to have to start working across the aisle to get Democrat states. And so this is really the first national discussion on this issue. And so we're hoping that this gets to, obviously, the people that can maybe bring the resources to quickly push this to the finish line. So we just haven't made any attempts. And if you ask the average person, they have no idea that 28 states have already signed on to this. And so that's the real issue, is that most people don't even know that this even exists. Governor?
No, that's 100% what I was going to say, and this is kind of what we're resparking, right? Re-energizing a message to, frankly, to the bankers in New York, to the bondholders. We talked about that a little bit earlier. There's so much at risk here that in so much interest for folks to make this investment now. And I think getting South Carolina as the 28th state, and again, the goal isn't to get to 34. The goal is to get to 32, 33. And I've spoken to Speaker Johnson and Senate President Thune about this and said, look, we're going to get the pressure. And they said, that's great, because we can't do it unless unless we're forced to do it. And so I think there's opportunity, and as you said, but the message does have to be elevated.
But the thing is this is not like underwriting U.S. Senate campaigns where, like, to make a difference, you've got to commit, tens of millions of dollars to even, move the needle at all. You're talking about how many legislators do we need to flip? Like, literally, you influence a dozen people who've been locally elected across 6 states. So the money that you need is a small fraction, because once you tell, you're a state rep in Idaho, and you tell the folks, hey, we have an opportunity to rein Congress in on spending and debt, and Rep John Smith ain't doing it, they'll start calling. And these guys at the state level, when they start getting hit, like, they're like, oh my gosh, when they're people, because their constituents see them. They see them out going to the supermarket, all this other stuff. It could be very, very effective. It just needs to be targeted. It does require resources, but like, this is not like $100 million to be able to get these states across. I mean, you could do it, and then this group's got a really good plan for it. And so, yeah, I think people just don't know that it's there. But I tell you, everyone I've talked to who when they say, oh, I heard you're doing that, what's the deal? When I tell them, hey, yeah, here's all you need to do. You need to do this. It requires some money, but they're like, oh, sign me up. And a lot of this are individual folks. I mean, I don't even know if they're necessarily a vested interest, but just people that care about the trajectory of the country. So I definitely think that financial support can be tapped for this.
Just in addition to that, when we first started this in 2010, it was really, really under the radar. Most state legislators, say there's 7,000 state legislators, maybe 6 knew about Article 5. And so we would have to go in and we would communicate this message to them, oh, that's a good idea, we'll go ahead and pass it. Now, if South Dakota passes it, the national media is not there in Pierce, South Dakota, covering that event. And so we were able to get several states passed, simply meeting with legislators. But the more we got passed, the more the opposition learned of it. And every state got harder. And that's when we basically, Lauren and I were, and a handful of others, working on our own checkbooks doing this. We couldn't, we just couldn't we didn't have the resources to even do what we were doing before. So it's right, it doesn't take the money for a congressional campaign, like you guys are spending $100 million to get somebody to the House. But it takes millions of dollars now to finish the job. But and that is communicating to the people. And once the people in these Senate districts or House districts understand their legislator can do this, they'll get on the phone and they'll get us the votes.
You've got a diverse audience in here with probably some press and individuals, and my guess is for many of us, you've made a compelling case. For people that are interested, how can they help you specifically?
Well, we have a 501c3 and a 501c4. Obviously, the C3 is the education. The C4, we do the lobbying through. The 501c3 is balancebudgetnow.com. And the 501c4 is bbA4USA.com. So you've got those 2 different entities, and clearly there you can learn more about the campaign and everything else. One more question? You back there.
This is a narrow issue, but I think it's important with regard to the procedure in Congress. And that is to understand that when the adequate number of states have petitioned the Congress, that it's a ministerial duty that it calls the convention. It's not a choice. It's not an enumerated power. And so that one thing I think that would be helpful, and maybe poses as a question, is how can the states make sure that Congress honors that ministerial duty?
Well, that's a good question. And what we did about 10 years ago is we worked with Congressman Steve Stivers of Ohio and the former chair of the House Judiciary Committee, a congressman from Virginia, Bob Goodlatte. And they added a rule in the House that forced the House Judiciary Committee to go in and count all the convention calls that were just simply in the congressional record. Because up to that point, there was no repository. You would have, if you literally got to the point where a group came to Congress and said, hey, we're at 34 states, Congress would be looking around, deer in the headlights, and they would have to literally cull through the entire congressional record from, dozens of years to find those. Because when a state calls for a convention, it has to send an official message to both houses of Congress, and then they record it in the congressional, or they read it into the congressional record. So there was a rule added that the House Judiciary Committee is in charge of that, and they do have a repository of the current convention calls. I think that was our last question, so I will make a few brief closing remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Governor DeSantis, who will kind of take us out. This really is pretty simple. We have a debt that is 7 times the size of our income, which makes paying interest almost impossible at all but the lowest interest rates. To the point where, and even then, the Fed has been keeping interest rates sub 5%. You all remember from the housing bubble up until 2022 when inflation started rising, it was almost at 0. That was the only way we were able to pay the interest on the debt, and we were still borrowing every cent. Over the last decade, we've literally borrowed every cent for every interest payment that we've made. And I don't know about you, but when you get to the point where your personal debt is so great that you're taking out additional loans and additional credit cards to just pay the interest, we all know where that leads. We've been there for over 10 years, and Congress is piling another $2 trillion or so every single year. So this is not something that we can continue to kick down the road. I remember a quote that struck me. Thomas Jefferson said something like, if one generation is able to pass a debt on to the second generation, then the earth would belong to the dead and not the living. So we have the solution. And again, Thomas Jefferson was the first one to suggest an amendment to the Constitution limiting Congress's borrowing power. We are there on the cusp, 28 states, just 5 more. We turn to Congress, and we have members of Congress begging us to get to 33 because then that gives them, that forces action. That's really what we're talking about, is forcing action. Congress proposes the amendment, and then it sends it out to the states for ratification, and hopefully 15 years from now, we will get to a balanced budget, and they'll be writing about this campaign in the storybooks. So we really appreciate everybody from coming. I want to personally thank, before I turn it over to Governor DeSantis, the American Enterprise Institute, Robert Doar, also all of the panelists who came, especially Ambassador Baucus, Governor Kasich, and Governor DeSantis for traveling as far as they did. And the award definitely goes to Ambassador Baucus for coming 2,500 miles just to be here from Montana. So thank you, Ambassador. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Governor DeSantis to take us out.
Well, I think this is obviously an important issue. Lauren and all the panelists discussed that, but I think we have an issue just in our country. A lot of people feel like it doesn't matter, right? I can't change anything. Yeah, you can point to the debt, or you can point to whatever you want. Nothing changes. Washington is what it is. It's just that. And using this Article 5 process, it really does give people an ability to change the trajectory of the country the way the founders intended. We've gone to some of these states. You talk to these legislators. You can move the needle doing this. And part of the reason I'm drawn to it is, obviously I believe in the issue, the substantive issue, but I also see an ability to actually get it done. If we only relied on Congress and didn't have the states to at least pressure to get them to write it or even draft one ourselves, then I would just say it ain't gonna happen. Don't even worry about it. It doesn't even take a lot of money relative to how much political spending's out there to influence and get some of these state legislators to get on board. So you actually can make a difference doing this. And I think we've been able to do a lot just in the last year and a half, 2 years that I've been involved in it. And now that we're getting more and more, we need to start elevating the visibility of this and then building the momentum. But you have a much better chance of really moving the needle through this process with what we're attempting than to just hope somehow we're going to just elect the right people to Congress and then they're going to fix everything. I think we've seen that is not something that you would want to bet your money on.
Robert, would you like to come up and kind of?
I don't need to, but you've done such a great job. I just want to thank everybody. Thank you. Thank the panel. Governor DeSantis, it's a great honor having you at AEI. Governor Sununu, always great to see you. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to the crowd. Thanks for a great day.